The world ended on a Tuesday afternoon, and Leo was in his dorm room trying to finish a paper that was already 3 days late. He'd been hunched over his laptop for hours, the blue light casting long shadows across the cluttered space. Empty ramen cups littered the floor, textbooks lay open and forgotten, and a single window looked out onto a campus that had been growing increasingly quiet over the past week. First it was the news reports, strange energy surges, unexplained phenomena, people collapsing in the streets. Then the internet went down. Then the power. Now there was only the sound of his own breathing and the distant, occasional scream that made the hair on his arms stand up. Leo was a college dropout in all but name. He'd stopped attending classes a month ago, too anxious to face the mounting pressure of exams and his parents' disappointed voices over the phone. Instead, he'd holed up in his dorm, surviving on instant noodles and the fading hope that somehow, things would just work out. He was 22 years old, skinny with messy brown hair that fell into his eyes, and he wore a faded band t-shirt that smelled vaguely of regret. When the system apocalypse hit, it wasn't with a bang, but with a whisper inside his skull. A chime, soft and melodic, echoed in his mind. Leo jerked upright, knocking his laptop to the floor. The screen went dark. For a moment, he thought he was having a panic attack, his heart hammered against his ribs, his palms grew slick with sweat. But then words appeared in his vision, glowing with an ethereal blue light that had no source. Welcome to the system integration. Initializing. Scanning host. Awakening class, synthesis master. Leo blinked. The words remained, hovering in the air like a hologram. He reached out a trembling hand, but his fingers passed through them. What the hell, he whispered, his voice cracking. More text scrolled into view. Class, synthesis master. Rarity, common. Description, you can combine any 2 items to create a new, slightly improved version. Success rate depends on item compatibility and user skill, ***. Skill level, 1. Mana, 10 out of 10. Combine items. Leo muttered. He looked around his dorm room, at the junk strewn everywhere. Was this some kind of hallucination? A final mental breakdown before the world truly went to shit? But the words felt real, solid in a way that dreams never did. He had to test it. His eyes landed on a stick he'd picked up during a walk last week, a twisted piece of oak about the length of his forearm, smooth from where he'd been fidgeting with it. Next to it, on his desk, was a pebble he'd kept as a paperweight, gray and unremarkable. 2 mundane objects. If this was real, they should be perfect. Leo picked up the stick and the pebble. They felt ordinary in his hands, cool, rough. He held them together, unsure what to do next. Combine, he said aloud, feeling ridiculous. The system chimed again. Items detected, stick, common, pebble, common. Compatibility, high. Initiate synthesis. Cost, 1 mana, ***. Yes/no. With a deep breath, Leo focused on the word yes. A warm tingling spread from his palms up his arms. The stick and pebble began to glow with a soft, white light. They vibrated, then melted together in a way that defied physics, the wood wrapping around the stone, fusing seamlessly. The light faded, leaving behind a single object. It was a rock. A sharp rock, to be precise. The pebble was now embedded in the end of the stick, forming a crude, pointed head. It looked like something a caveman might use as a tool. Leo turned it over in his hands. It was slightly heavier than the stick alone, and the edge of the stone had a rough, jagged sharpness to it. Synthesis successful. Created, sharp rock, common. Description, a rudimentary tool with minor piercing capability. Mana, 9 out of 10. Leo stared at it. That's it, he said, disappointment washing over him. A sharp rock. In a world that had apparently turned into a video game, he'd been given the power to make slightly better junk. He almost laughed, but the sound died in his throat as a crash echoed from the hallway outside. Something heavy slammed against his door. The wood splintered. Leo stumbled back, the sharp rock clutched in his hand like a talisman. His mind raced, monsters. The news reports before everything went dark had mentioned creatures, things that shouldn't exist, emerging from energy rifts. He dismissed it as hysteria. Now, as the door shuttered under another impact, he knew it was real. With a final crack, the door burst inward. A creature filled the doorway. It was the size of a large dog, but shaped like a twisted insect, with too many legs and a carapace that gleamed dully in the dim light. Its eyes were clusters of red dots, and a low, chittering sound came from its mandibles. System prompt, Lesser Void Crawler, Level 2, flashed in Leo's vision. Panic seized him. He was no fighter. He'd never been in a fight in his life. The creature scuttled forward, its legs tapping against the linoleum floor. Leo did the only thing he could think of, he threw the sharp rock. It sailed through the air, end over end, and struck the void crawler squarely in the head. There was a dull thunk. The rock bounced off harmlessly, clattering to the floor. The creature didn't even flinch. It just kept coming, its chittering growing louder. "Oh God," Leo whispered, backing up until he hit the wall. This was it. He was going to die in his dorm room, killed by a bug monster, and his last act had been to throw a stupid rock. He squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for the pain. It didn't come. Instead, there was a gasp from the doorway. Leo opened his eyes. The void crawler was gone, vanished, as if it had never been there. But in its place stood a woman, leaning heavily against the broken doorframe. She was tall, with athletic build visible even under torn, blood-stained armor. Her hair was a wild tangle of dark curls, and her face was pale, etched with pain. A deep gash ran across her shoulder, oozing black ichor that seemed to pulse with a malevolent light. System prompt, Elena, S-Rank Hunter, Level 45, Status, Cursed, Fatal. Elena's eyes were glazed, but they locked onto Leo. "You," she rasped, her voice barely audible. She took a stumbling step forward, then collapsed to her knees. Her hand reached out, fingers brushing against the sharp rock where it lay on the floor. The moment her skin made contact, the world seemed to hold its breath. The black ichor on her shoulder shimmered, then began to recede. It drew back into the wound like ink being sucked into a pen, the pulsing light fading to nothing. The gash itself knitted together, skin smoothing over until only a faint scar remained. Color returned to Elena's face, and her breathing steadied. Leo could only stare, his mouth hanging open. Above them, the system chimed, louder and more triumphant than before. Golden text blazed across Leo's vision, so bright it was almost blinding. Divine artifact acquired, Godsliver Shard of Eternity. Effect, nullifies high-level curses, restores vitality, and leaves a fragment of eternal essence in the user. Rarity, Mythic. Holder, Elena, S-Rank Hunter. Elena slowly pushed herself to her feet. She looked at her shoulder, then at her hands, as if seeing them for the first time. The weakness was gone, replaced by a steady strength. She picked up the sharp rock, the Godsliver Shard of Eternity, according to the system, and turned it over. It looked exactly the same as before, a stick with a pointy rock tied to it. Mundane. Unremarkable. But when she looked up at Leo, her eyes were wide with something he'd never seen directed at him before. Awe. Pure, unadulterated awe. "You," she breathed, taking a step toward him. The broken glass and debris crunched under her boots. That creature, the void crawler, it was drawn to the artifact's energy. But when I touched it, she shook her head, as if trying to clear it. "I've been cursed for days. Nothing worked. Not healing potions, not purification rituals. The system said I had hours left." Leo just stood there, frozen. His mind was a whirlwind. The sharp rock had cured her. But it was just a stick and a pebble. He'd made it himself. The system was calling it a divine artifact, but that had to be a mistake. A glitch. It was the only explanation. Elena closed the distance between them. She was taller than him, and even wounded, she carried an aura of power that made Leo feel like a child. She held out the sharp rock. "Take it," she said, her voice stronger now. "This is yours." Hesitantly, Leo reached out and took it. It felt the same as before, rough wood, cool stone. But in Elena's eyes, it was something holy. "How?" she asked, her gaze searching his face. "How did you craft this? I've never seen anything like it. The energy it radiates, it's ancient. Primordial. I just combined a stick and a pebble," Leo stammered. "It's my class. Synthesis Master. I can combine things." Elena's brow furrowed. "Synthesis Master. That's a common class. I've seen a dozen of them since the system arrived. They make slightly better gear, but nothing like this." She gestured to the sharp rock. "This is a mythic item. It shouldn't be possible. Leo's heart was pounding again. He could see the disbelief in her eyes turning to something else, a dawning realization. Maybe the system made a mistake, he offered weakly. The system doesn't make mistakes, Elena said, her voice firm. Not about something like this. She looked around the dorm room, at the clutter and the broken door. You were here alone. You crafted this with your own power. And it saved my life. She took another step closer, until they were barely a foot apart. Leo could see the intensity in her eyes, the way they gleamed in the dim light. He shrank back, but there was nowhere to go. I've fought monsters that could level cities, Elena whispered. I've seen artifacts that kings would kill for. But this, she nodded to the sharp rock in Leo's hand. This is different. It doesn't just heal. It purifies. It rewrites reality. Leo's mouth was dry. It's just a rock, he said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. Elena shook her head slowly. A smile touched her lips, not a friendly smile, but one of wonder and reverence. No. It's not. She reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. Her grip was firm, steady. Leo flinched, but she didn't let go. You crafted a fragment of eternity from a stick and a stone, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper filled with awe. You saved me when all hope was lost. She leaned in, her eyes locking with his. The world outside seemed to fade away, the distant screams, the ruined campus, the broken door. There was only this moment, this impossible moment. You, Elena breathed, the words hanging in the air like a prayer. You're a god. And as the system's golden text still glowed in his vision, proclaiming the Godsliver shard of eternity, Leo felt the weight of those words settle over him. They were a revelation. A condemnation. A destiny he'd never asked for. He looked down at the sharp rock in his hand. It was just a stick and a pebble. But to the world, it was so much more. And now, to the world, so was he. The world outside Leo's dorm was a canvas of ruin. Smoke stained the sky in greasy columns, and the distant sounds of screams and monstrous roars echoed through the shattered streets. Elena, despite her recent brush with death, moved with a predator's grace, her hand firm on Leo's arm as she half-dragged, half-guided him through the debris. Her wound had closed, leaving only a faint silvery scar where the curse had festered, but her eyes held a feverish intensity that made Leo's stomach churn. Keep up, she muttered, her voice low and urgent. The camp isn't far, but the void crawlers are getting bolder. Leo stumbled over a chunk of concrete, his heart hammering against his ribs. He clutched the sharp rock in his pocket, its rough edges digging into his palm. The weight of it felt absurd, just a stick and a pebble fused together by whatever glitch had hijacked his synthesis master skill. Yet, the system notification still burned in his mind, Godsliver shard of eternity, mythic grade, curse nullification complete. He wanted to laugh, or maybe cry. Instead, he kept his mouth shut, his mind racing with panic. What had he done? And why did Elena look at him like he'd hung the stars? They reached the survivor camp as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the makeshift fortifications. It was nestled in what had once been a city park, now surrounded by a haphazard wall of overturned cars, broken furniture, and twisted metal. Guards patrolled the perimeter, their faces grim under the flickering light of torches and a few jury-rigged electric lamps. Elena nodded to a burly man with a scar across his cheek, and he waved them through a narrow gap in the barricade. Inside, the camp was a hive of desperate activity. Tents and lean-tos dotted the grass, and the air smelled of sweat, smoke, and something faintly metallic, blood, Leo realized with a shudder. People moved with a weary determination, tending to wounds, cooking over small fires, or huddling together for warmth. Their eyes followed Elena with a mix of respect and hope, but when they landed on Leo, they narrowed in confusion. He was just a skinny kid in a stained hoodie, looking like he'd been pulled from a dumpster. Elena led him to the center of the camp, where a large tent stood, its fabric patched with scraps of tarpaulin. She pushed aside the flap, and Leo found himself facing a group of 5 people seated around a makeshift table made from a door balanced on crates. They were the camp leaders, their faces etched with the strain of survival. At the head sat a woman in her 50s, her hair streaked with gray and her eyes sharp as flint. She wore a leather jacket over practical gear, and a hunting knife rested at her hip. Elena, the woman said, her voice calm but edged with authority. You're back sooner than expected. And you've brought company. Elena stepped forward, her posture straightening. Commander Vance, this is Leo. He's the one who saved me. A murmur rippled through the tent. Commander Vance's gaze swept over Leo, lingering on his trembling hands. Saved you? From the Void Crawler's curse? That's impossible. Even our best healers couldn't touch it. It wasn't healing, Elena said, her voice rising with excitement. She pulled the sharp rock from Leo's pocket before he could protest and placed it on the table. It looked pathetic, a rough, grayish lump with bits of wood still visible. He crafted this. A divine artifact. The system called it the Godsliver Shard of Eternity. Silence fell, thick and heavy. Leo could feel the weight of their stares, like physical pressure against his skin. He wanted to shrink into the shadows, to deny everything, but Elena's fervent belief pinned him in place. Commander Vance picked up the rock, turning it over in her hands. Her fingers traced the fused surfaces, and for a moment, Leo thought she might laugh. Instead, she frowned. The system log confirms it, she said slowly, her eyes flickering as she accessed her interface. Mythic grade. Curse nullification. But this, it looks like a child's craft project. She looked at Leo. How did you make this? Leo's throat was dry. He swallowed, his mind scrambling for words. I have a skill. Synthesis master. I can combine things. His voice came out as a whisper. It was just a stick and a pebble. I didn't mean for it to. He's being modest, Elena cut in, her eyes blazing. He's a regressed deity, hiding his power. I felt it when I touched the shard, a warmth, like the sun breaking through clouds. My curse shattered in an instant. Commander Vance set the rock down, her expression unreadable. The other leaders leaned in, their skepticism warring with desperate hope. One of them, a man with a bandaged arm, spoke up. If he can make one divine artifact, he can make more. We're barely holding this camp. The monsters are getting stronger, and our supplies are low. We need an edge. Exactly, Elena said, turning to Leo. Show them. Craft something else. Leo felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. This was it, the moment his charade would collapse. He glanced around the tent, at the expectant faces, at Elena's unwavering faith, at the sharp rock sitting there like an accusation. His mind screamed at him to run, but his legs felt like lead. He had no choice. If he refused, they might turn on him. If he tried and failed, well, he didn't want to think about that. I need materials, he stammered, his voice barely audible. Commander Vance nodded to a younger woman at the edge of the tent. Maya, bring the salvage bin. Maya hurried out and returned moments later with a small metal crate filled with odds and ends, bits of wire, broken tools, a handful of nails, a few paperclips, some scraps of cloth. It was junk, the detritus of a collapsed world. Leo's heart sank. This was what they expected him to work with. To create divine artifacts. He wanted to laugh hysterically, but he forced himself to reach into the crate, his fingers trembling. He picked up a paperclip, its metal cool and smooth, and a length of thin copper wire. They were mundane, worthless. Perfect for his skill, which had only ever produced slightly better versions of things, a sharper knife from two dull ones, a sturdier cup from cracked ceramics. But now, with the system glitch. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. In his mind, he focused on the synthesis master interface, a faint blue screen only he could see. It hovered in his vision, simple and unassuming, combined two items. He selected the paperclip and the wire. A tingling sensation spread through his hands, familiar yet always strange. The paperclip and wire glowed with a soft, white light, merging and twisting together. The process took only a few seconds, but to Leo, it felt like an eternity. The light faded, leaving behind a single object, a reinforced paperclip. It was slightly thicker than before, with the wire woven around it in a tight spiral, giving it a ridged texture. It looked sturdy. Maybe useful for holding a stack of papers together, if papers still mattered in this apocalypse. He held it up, his hand shaking. It's done. Elena snatched it from him, her eyes wide. She turned it over, then gasped. The system. Look. A notification flashed in Leo's vision, bright and impossible, AEON-PIERCING Needle of Fate, legendary grade, ignores all defense, one-time use. He stared, his breath catching. AEON-PIERCING. Fate. What did that even mean? Around him, the camp leaders accessed their own interfaces, their expressions shifting from doubt to awe. Legendary grade, Commander Vance whispered, her voice hushed. Ignores all defense. This could change everything. We need to test it, the bandaged man said, rising to his feet. There's a lesser void crawler trapped in the old fountain at the east edge. Weak, but its hide is tough. If this needle can pierce it. Leo wanted to protest, to tell them it was just a paperclip, but Elena was already pulling him out of the tent, the leaders following close behind. They moved through the camp, drawing curious stares from the survivors. At the east barricade, 2 guards pointed to a crumbling stone fountain about 20 yards away. In its shallow, murky water, a void crawler thrashed, a creature the size of a large dog, with oily black skin and too many legs. It was trapped, its limbs tangled in debris, but its jaws snapped at the air, dripping with something dark and viscous. Give it to me, Commander Vance said, holding out her hand. Elena passed her the reinforced paperclip. Vance hefted it, her brow furrowed. It looked absurdly small in her palm. She glanced at Leo. How does it work? Leo's mind went blank. You just throw it, I guess. Vance nodded, her face set in grim determination. She took a step forward, raised her arm, and hurled the paperclip with all her strength. It flew through the air, a tiny silver dart against the twilight sky. Leo held his breath, expecting it to bounce harmlessly off the monster's hide. It struck the void crawler in the center of its mass. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a brilliant white light erupted from the point of impact, so bright that Leo had to shield his eyes. The light pierced through the creature, bursting out the other side in a shower of sparks. The void crawler let out a gurgling shriek, its body convulsing. The light spread, cracking its skin like glass, and then, it disintegrated. Not just died, but vanished into motes of ash that drifted away on the breeze. Silence. Leo stared, his mouth agape. The paperclip was gone, consumed in the blast. But the fountain was empty, save for a faint scorch mark on the stone. Around him, the camp leaders stood frozen, their faces pale with shock. Elena let out a breathless laugh, her eyes shining with triumph. Commander Vance turned slowly, her gaze locking onto Leo. The awe in her eyes had hardened into something else, a fierce, almost religious certainty. She stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. Her grip was firm, grounding him in a reality that felt more surreal than any nightmare. Leo, she said, her voice ringing out clear and strong, carrying across the hushed camp. You have given us hope where there was none. With this power, we can fight back. We can survive. She raised her other hand, pointing at him as the survivors began to gather, their whispers growing into a murmur of wonder. We have a war god among us. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Leo felt a chill run down his spine, colder than any monster's touch. He looked at Elena, at the camp leaders, at the faces of the survivors now staring at him with a mixture of reverence and desperation. They saw a savior, a deity in disguise. All he saw was a terrified college dropout who'd glued some junk together. And as the cheers began to rise, soft at first, then swelling into a roar that shook the very ground, Leo realized with sinking dread that there was no going back. The charade had begun, and he was trapped at its center, a false god built on a foundation of sticks, stones, and a system that had lost its mind. He closed his eyes, the noise washing over him, and wondered how long he could keep from falling apart. The armored transport rumbled through the gates of Azure Dawn Academy, and Leo felt his stomach tighten into a knot. Through the reinforced glass window, he saw a fortress carved into the side of a mountain, towering walls of polished white stone gleaming under the pale morning sun, turrets bristling with energy cannons, and floating platforms where students in sleek uniforms practiced combat maneuvers against holographic monsters. It looked less like a school and more like a military installation from a sci-fi movie. Welcome to your new home, Elena said from beside him, her voice softer than it had been in the camp. She'd changed into a form-fitting combat suit with the Academy's insignia, a stylized dawn breaking over waves, on her shoulder. The curse that had nearly killed her was gone, but dark circles still shadowed her eyes. They'd fast-tracked your enrollment. As a special student. Leo swallowed hard. Special sounded like a death sentence. In the camp, Commander Vance's declaration, "We have a war god among us," had spread like wildfire. Overnight, he'd gone from a terrified dropout to a messiah in the eyes of survivors who clung to any shred of hope. They'd packed his few belongings, a ragged backpack with some junk he'd scavenged, and shipped him here with Elena as his escort. Now, as the transport hissed to a stop in a courtyard paved with luminous blue tiles, he could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on him. "Remember," Elena whispered as the doors slid open. "Just, do what you did before. Combine things. The system will handle the rest." He wanted to scream that the system was broken, that his power was a glitch, that he was one failed synthesis away from being exposed as a fraud. But the words died in his throat. Outside, a group of Academy officials waited, their expressions a mix of awe and scrutiny. At their head stood a tall woman with silver hair tied in a severe bun, wearing robes embroidered with intricate runes. Her eyes, sharp and analytical, fixed on Leo the moment he stepped out. "Leo," she said, her voice carrying an unnatural resonance that made the air hum. "I am Headmistress Althea. We've been briefed on your unique abilities. The Azure Dawn Academy is honored to host a being of your purported divinity." Leo's mouth went dry. "I'm not," he started, but Elena nudged him subtly with her elbow. "He's humble," Elena interjected smoothly. "A trait of true power." Headmistress Althea's lips quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Indeed. Come. Your orientation begins immediately." She led them through archways into the Academy's interior. The place was a labyrinth of gleaming corridors, classrooms with transparent walls showing simulations of monster ecosystems, and training halls where students hurled spells and summoned weapons from thin air. Leo watched, mesmerized and terrified. These were the awakened, people with real powers, not some glitched-out synthesis skill. A boy his age conjured a whirlwind of ice to shatter a target dummy. A girl phased through a solid wall like a ghost. Compared to them, he was a joke with a candy wrapper. "Your schedule is accelerated," Headmistress Althea explained as they walked. "Given the escalating monster swarms, we cannot afford to waste time. You'll attend core classes on system mechanics, combat theory, and artifact analysis. But first, Professor Kalen has requested a demonstration in his introductory seminar." Leo's heart skipped a beat. "A demonstration? Of your synthesis ability," she said, stopping before a set of double doors engraved with celestial maps. "The class is eager to witness the work of a war god." Before he could protest, the doors swung open. The room beyond was an amphitheater, tiered seating rising around a central dais where a middle-aged man with a neatly trimmed beard stood beside a holographic display. Dozens of students filled the seats, their uniforms crisp, their eyes wide with curiosity. Leo recognized some from the courtyard, the ice wielder, the phase shifter, others with glowing auras or animalistic features. They were all staring at him. "Ah, our guest of honor," Professor Kalen said, his voice booming in the quiet room. He wore simple robes but moved with the grace of a predator. "Leo, if you'd join me on the dais. We've heard tales of your Godsliver shard and AEON-PIERCING needle. Today, you'll show us how such miracles are forged." Elena gave Leo a gentle push forward. His legs felt like lead as he climbed the steps to the dais, the eyes of the class burning into his back. The professor gestured to a table set with an array of mundane items, a cracked teacup, a bundle of twine, a handful of coins, a candy wrapper, a rubber band, a dried-up pen. "Choose any two," Kalen said. "Combine them. Let us see the process of divine craft." Leo's hands trembled. This was it, the moment the charade would crumble. In the camp, he'd had the element of panic, the desperation of a dying hunter. Here, under the cold light of academic scrutiny, there was no hiding. He scanned the items, his mind racing. The candy wrapper was bright red, crumpled from some pre-apocalypse treat. The rubber band was plain beige, stretched thin. They were trash, nothing more. But they were simple, harmless. Maybe if he failed spectacularly, they'd just think he was having an off day. He picked them up, the wrapper slick under his sweaty fingers, the rubber band snapping taut. The class leaned forward, a collective breath held. Professor Kalen watched, his expression unreadable. Leo closed his eyes, reaching for that internal sense he'd discovered in his dorm, the glitched skill interface that hovered in his mind like a phantom menu. Synthesis Master, active. Select 2 items. He focused on the wrapper and rubber band, imagining them merging. A tingling spread from his palms, faint and familiar. The air around his hands shimmered, distorting like heat haze. Then, it happened. The wrapper unfolded, wrapping itself around the rubber band in a spiral, the material stretching and melding until it formed a single, cohesive object, a stretchy, red and beige ribbon about a foot long. It felt flimsy, like something a child might make for a craft project. Leo held it up, his heart sinking. This was it. This was what would convince them he was a god. But before he could speak, the system notification flashed across his vision, bright and intrusive. Synthesis complete, stretchy wrapper created. System override detected. Reclassifying, ***. Artifact identified, reality binding ribbon of chaos. Tier, divine. Effect, temporarily alters local reality parameters when activated. Warning, unstable. A gasp rippled through the class. The holographic display behind Professor Kalin flickered, projecting the system's log entry for all to see. Murmurs broke out. Reality binding, someone whispered. Chaos. Is that even possible? Leo stared at the ribbon in his hand. It looked exactly the same, just a candy wrapper fused with a rubber band. But the system's words hung in the air, heavy with implication. He'd made another divine artifact from garbage. The glitch was real, and it was escalating. Professor Kalin stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. Fascinating, he murmured, taking the ribbon from Leo's trembling grasp. He held it up to the light, examining it. The system attributes reality-altering properties to this confectionery remnant. Would you care to demonstrate its function? Leo's throat tightened. I don't know how, he admitted, the truth slipping out in his panic. A snort came from the front row. Leo's eyes snapped to the source, a student with spiky black hair and a sneer that seemed permanently etched on his face. He wore his uniform with a deliberate slouch, and a jagged scar cut across his cheek. Of course he doesn't know, the student said, his voice dripping with contempt. Look at it. It's a piece of trash. This is a joke. The room fell silent. Professor Kalin raised an eyebrow but didn't intervene. The scarred student stood up, his movements fluid and aggressive. I'm Kale, he announced, addressing the class. Awakened rank B, pyrokinetic specialization. And I call bullshit. We've all heard the stories, some nobody combines a stick and a rock, and suddenly he's a war god. Please. The system's been glitching since the apocalypse. This is just another anomaly. Leo felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. Kale's words were too close to the truth. It's not, he began, but Kale cut him off. Prove it, Kale challenged, stepping down to the dais. He pointed a finger at the ribbon in Professor Kalin's hand. Activate it. Show us this reality-binding power. Or admit you're a fraud who got lucky with a couple of flukes. The class's curiosity turned to tension. Eyes darted between Leo and Kale. Elena, standing by the door, tensed, her hand drifting toward the weapon at her hip. Professor Kalin watched, a faint smile playing on his lips, as if this confrontation was exactly what he'd hoped for. Leo's mind raced. He had no idea how to activate the ribbon. The system said it was unstable. What if it did nothing? Or worse, what if it exploded? But if he backed down now, everything would unravel. The camp's faith, Elena's protection, his tenuous safety, all gone. He had to double down on the charade. He took a shaky breath, reaching for the ribbon. Professor Kalin handed it back, his expression unreadable. Leo held it between his hands, focusing on that internal interface again. Reality-binding ribbon of chaos, inert. Activation requires user intent. Intent? What did that even mean? He thought of the desperate need to prove himself, the fear of exposure, the absurdity of it all, a candy wrapper deciding his fate. As he concentrated, the ribbon began to glow with a faint, chaotic light, red and beige swirls dancing along its length. The air in the dais warped, colors bleeding at the edges of his vision. A low hum filled the room. Kale took a step back, his sneer faltering. See? Leo said, his voice stronger than he felt. It's real. But Kale recovered quickly, his eyes hardening. A light show. Big deal. I've seen novices do more with parlor tricks. He crossed his arms. I challenge you to a duel. Tomorrow, in the combat arena. No system logs, no interpretations, just your divine artifacts against my fire. Let's see what happens when there's no audience to misinterpret your garbage. The challenge hung in the air, sharp and dangerous. The class erupted into whispers. Professor Kalin finally spoke, his voice cutting through the noise. An interesting proposal. Duels are permitted for skill demonstration, provided both parties consent. Leo, do you accept? Leo's mouth went dry. a duel. Against a B-rank pyrokinetic. He'd be incinerated in seconds. But every eye was on him, the hopeful, the skeptical, the hostile. He glanced at Elena, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. She believed in the charade, or at least, she believed in the necessity of it. He straightened, clutching the glowing ribbon. "I accept," he said, the words tasting like ash. Kale's smirk returned, wider now. "Good. Tomorrow at dawn. Don't bother bringing more candy wrappers." He turned and strode out of the amphitheater, the class parting for him. As the seminar dissolved into chatter, Leo stood on the dais, the reality-binding ribbon of chaos cooling in his hand. Professor Kalen approached, his voice low. "A bold move, Leo. Kale is one of our most talented, and volatile, students. I'll be watching with great interest." He paused, then added, "The system's interpretation of your creations is unprecedented. Whether it's divinity or glitch, it has power. Use it wisely." Leo nodded numbly, his mind already racing. He had less than a day to figure out how to survive a duel with a fire wielder, using nothing but junk and a broken system. As Headmistress Althea led him to his assigned quarters, a lavish suite with a view of the monster-infested wastes beyond the walls, he felt the weight of the academy closing in around him. The ribbon lay on a desk, inert once more, a silent reminder of the chaos he'd unleashed. That night, as he lay in a bed too soft to feel real, Leo stared at the ceiling. The system interface flickered in his mind, showing the log for the ribbon alongside the earlier artifacts. Godsliver Shard of Eternity, Aeon-Piercing Needle of Fate, Reality-Binding Ribbon of Chaos. 3 divine items from sticks, paperclips, and candy wrappers. And now, a duel that could expose it all. He thought of Kale's sneer, the class's expectations, Elena's silent faith. He was trapped in a lie that was growing more real with every synthesis. He got up, pacing the room. His backpack sat in a corner, filled with the junk he'd brought from the camp, a broken phone, a battery, some string, a rock, a leaf. Trash, all of it. But it was all he had. He picked up the broken phone, its screen cracked and dark, and the battery, cold and heavy. If he was going to face Kale's fire, he needed something that could counter it. Something that could turn the system's glitch to his advantage. He sat on the floor, placing the phone and battery before him. The synthesis tingling began in his palms, faint but persistent. He closed his eyes, focusing. Combine them. Make something. Anything. The charade had to hold, just a little longer. Outside his window, the first light of dawn began to bleed into the sky, and the reality-binding ribbon of chaos glimmered faintly on the desk, as if whispering of the chaos to come. The night before the duel stretched into an eternity of panic. Leo's dorm room at Azure Dawn Academy was a stark, utilitarian space, gray walls, a narrow bed, a desk littered with the remnants of his previous syntheses. The candy wrapper and rubber band from Professor Kalen's class lay discarded, the system's label, reality-binding ribbon of chaos, still faintly glowing in his mind's eye. But now, that absurd creation felt like a cruel joke. Kale's challenge echoed in his skull, a duel at dawn in the combat arena, with the entire academy watching. No more hiding behind misinterpretations, Kale wanted proof of real power. Leo paced the room, his hands trembling. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool air filtering through the fortress's ventilation system. Azure Dawn Academy was a marvel of post-apocalyptic engineering, a massive stone and metal structure built into a mountainside, with reinforced walls and energy barriers humming in the distance. From his window, he could see the training grounds below, illuminated by flickering system-powered lights. Monsters roamed beyond the perimeter, their distant roars a constant reminder of the world's fragility. And here he was, a college dropout turned accidental messiah, about to be exposed as a fraud. "I can't do this," he muttered to himself, running a hand through his messy brown hair. His reflection in the room's small mirror showed dark circles under his eyes, the face of a man who hadn't slept in days. Ever since the system apocalypse hit, his life had spiraled from mundane terror to surreal absurdity. First the stick and pebble becoming the Godsliver Shard of Eternity, then the paperclip turning into the Aeon-Piercing Needle of Fate. Each synthesis was just him fumbling with junk, but the system's glitch painted it as divine intervention. Now, with Kale's skepticism, the charade was crumbling. He slumped at the desk, staring at the items he'd gathered, a broken smartphone with a cracked screen, a half-dead battery he'd scavenged from a storage room, some loose wires, and a handful of other discarded tech. In the old world, he'd been studying computer science, not that it mattered now. The system had overwritten everything with its game-like interface, levels, and skills. His own skill, Synthesis Master, glowed in his mental HUD as a bronze-tier ability, its description bland, combined two items to create a new one. No hint of the reality-bending misinterpretations. Maybe I can make something useful, he whispered, though the words felt hollow. Useful? His creations were only useful because the system lied about them. But he had to try. Kale was a fire mage, according to the whispers in the halls, and awakened with a B-rank affinity for flame magic. In the arena, he'd likely unleash torrents of fire, and Leo had no defensive skills, no enhanced durability. Just his pathetic synthesis and a mountain of fear. Taking a deep breath, Leo picked up the broken phone. It was an old model, its casing chipped, the screen a spiderweb of fractures. He'd found it in a pile of debris during his rushed tour of the academy, a relic of the world before. The battery was slightly swollen, its charge indicator dead. He held both items in his hands, feeling their weight. This was it, another gamble. He closed his eyes, focusing on his skill. A soft blue light emanated from his palms, wrapping around the phone and battery. The synthesis process was always the same, a warm tingling, a brief flash, and then a new object materializing. This time, the tingling felt sharper, almost electric. Leo's heart pounded as the light intensified, swirling around the items. The phone's casing melted into the battery, wires fusing, components rearranging. When the light faded, he held a small, rectangular device, about the size of a deck of cards, with a rough, metallic surface and a single button on one side. It hummed faintly, emitting a low static buzz. No screen, no obvious function. Just a glitchy-looking gadget. He stared at it, hope and dread warring in his chest. Please work, he breathed. Then, the system notification flashed in his vision, the familiar golden text scrolling past. Synthesis complete, glitchy device. System log, item detected, system disruptor field. Tier, divine. Effect, emits a localized field that temporarily nullifies system-based abilities and spells within a 10-meter radius. Duration, 30 seconds. Cooldown, 1 hour. Leo's jaw dropped. Divine tier. System disruption. This was beyond anything he'd made before, a device that could actually interfere with the system itself. For a moment, a wild thought crossed his mind, what if this wasn't just a misinterpretation? What if his skill was evolving, tapping into something deeper? But he shoved the idea aside. No, it had to be another glitch. The system was broken, and he was just a beneficiary of its madness. He spent the rest of the night testing the device in his room, pressing the button cautiously. Each time, a pulse of static energy washed out, making the lights flicker and his skill interface stutter briefly. It didn't seem to harm anything, but the nullification effect was real. When he tried to activate a minor skill like inventory, it failed within the field's range. A flicker of confidence sparked in him. Maybe, just maybe, this could save him. Dawn came too soon. Leo dressed in the standard academy combat gear, a lightweight armored vest over a gray tunic, durable pants, and boots. He tucked the glitchy device into a pocket, its weight a comforting presence. As he left his room, the corridors were already buzzing with students. Whispers followed him, that's the war god, Kale's going to expose him, I heard his artifacts are fake. He kept his head down, avoiding eye contact, his stomach churning. The combat arena was a vast, circular space carved into the mountain's base, open to the sky above. Tiered stone seats rose around it, filled with hundreds of awakened students, professors, even some higher-ranked hunters like Elena, who gave him a worried nod from the front row. The air crackled with anticipation. In the center, Kale stood waiting, a tall, muscular figure with spiky red hair and a confident smirk. He wore elaborate mage robes embroidered with flame patterns, a staff tipped with a glowing red crystal in his hand. Professor Kalen, a stern-faced man with silver hair, presided from a raised platform. Leo, approach, he called, his voice amplified by the arena's acoustics. This duel is to test the authenticity of your abilities. No lethal force is permitted. Begin when ready. Leo walked forward, his legs feeling like jelly. The ground was smooth stone, scarred from previous battles. He stopped a few meters from Kale, who sneered. Ready to show your true colors, fraud? Kale said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. Laughter rippled through the stands. I'm not a fraud, Leo said, though his voice wavered. He gripped the glitchy device in his pocket, his palm sweaty. We'll see, Kale replied. He raised his staff, and the crystal blazed with fire. Let's make this quick. Without warning, Kale unleashed his first spell. A torrent of flames erupted from the staff, roaring toward Leo in a wave of heat. The crowd gasped. Leo's instincts screamed to run, but he forced himself to stand his ground. He yanked the device from his pocket, fumbling with the button. As the fire closed in, he pressed it. A burst of static energy exploded from the device, invisible but palpable. It washed over the arena in a shimmering wave. The fire spell hit the field and dissipated. Not extinguished, but unraveled, the flames breaking apart into harmless sparks that fizzled out before reaching Leo. The system notification flashed in everyone's vision. Ability nullified, Inferno Wave, by System Disruptor Field. Silence fell over the arena. Kale stared, his smirk vanishing. What did you do? He demanded, his voice tight. Leo didn't answer. He was as shocked as anyone. The device had worked, exactly as the system said. He could feel the field humming around him, a bubble of disruption. His own skill interface flickered, but he focused on holding the button down. The device grew warm in his hand, its static buzz intensifying. Impossible! Kale shouted. He cast another spell, a series of fireballs that shot toward Leo. Each one fizzled out in the field, popping like bubbles. The crowd began to murmur, confusion turning to awe. Whispers spread, he's disrupting magic. Is that a divine artifact? Kale's face twisted with rage. He charged forward, abandoning spells for physical attack, his staff swinging in a fiery arc. Leo ducked, scrambling backward. The field's duration was ticking down, he could feel it weakening. 30 seconds, the system had said. How long had it been? 15. 20. His heart raced. As Kale closed in, Leo released the button. The static field vanished abruptly. Kale sensed the change and grinned. Time's up, he roared, conjuring a massive fire spear above his head. The heat was intense, warping the air. Leo panicked, he had no defense now. He glanced at the device, its cooldown timer glowed in his mind, 59 minutes, 30 seconds remaining. Useless. But then, something unexpected happened. The system notification flashed again, this time for everyone to see. Item analysis, System Disruptor Field, has triggered a system anomaly. Scanning, ***. Anomaly detected, localized reality glitch. Source, Synthesis Master Skill. Log updated, System Disruptor Field, is confirmed as a divine tier artifact with permanent integration into system protocols. The crowd erupted into chaos. Shouts of amazement filled the air. Kale hesitated, his fire spear flickering. In that moment of distraction, Leo acted on pure instinct. He didn't have another synthesis ready, but he remembered the stretchy wrapper, the reality-binding ribbon of chaos, from yesterday. He'd tucked it into his pocket as a lucky charm. He pulled it out, the candy wrapper and rubber band fused into a shimmering, elastic strip. As Kale regained focus and hurled the fire spear, Leo threw the ribbon. It wasn't an attack, it was a desperate, clumsy toss. The ribbon unfurled in midair, glowing with a soft, chaotic light. When it touched the fire spear, the system blared another notification. Artifact interaction, reality-binding ribbon of chaos, has bound, Inferno Spear, causing spell feedback. The fire spear reversed course, shooting back toward Kale. He barely dodged, the heat singing his robes. The ribbon fell to the ground, inert now, but the damage was done. Kale staggered, his confidence shattered. The crowd's murmurs turned into cheers. He manipulated the spell, someone yelled. Leo stood panting, his mind reeling. He hadn't meant to do that, it was all the system's doing, interpreting his panic as mastery. But the effect was undeniable. Kale lowered his staff, defeat written on his face. I yield, he muttered, though the words were bitter. Professor Kalen stepped forward, his expression unreadable. The duel is over. Leo is victorious. The announcement was met with roaring applause. Students rushed down to the arena, surrounding Leo with questions and praise. Elena pushed through, her eyes wide with relief. You did it, she said, but her tone held a note of uncertainty. As the crowd celebrated, Leo noticed the academy dean, an elderly woman with sharp eyes and a regal bearing, watching from the highest seat. She leaned over to whisper to an attendant, her words barely audible over the noise, but Leo caught them, and they chilled him to the bone. He's not just crafting artifacts. He's manipulating the system itself. The words hung in the air, a new kind of fear settling in Leo's gut. The charade had deepened, but now the stakes were higher than ever. If the dean believed he could control the system, what would she demand next? And what would happen when they realized it was all a catastrophic misunderstanding? The morning after the duel dawned with an unnatural silence that clung to the stone corridors of Azure Dawn Academy like a shroud. Leo stood at his dormitory window, the cold glass pressed against his forehead as he stared out at the training grounds below. His fingers traced the rough edges of the glitchy device in his pocket, the system disruptor field, as the system insisted on calling it. The memory of yesterday's static burst, the way Kale's fire magic had fizzled into nothing, still sent shivers down his spine. He hadn't meant to win. He'd just been trying not to die. A knock at the door shattered his reverie. Elena stood there, her S-rank hunter's armor polished to a mirror shine, but her eyes held a weariness that the metal couldn't hide. "Leo," she said, her voice low. "The dean wants you in the command center. Now." Leo's stomach tightened. "Why? Is it about the duel?" Elena shook her head, a strand of dark hair escaping her braid. "Worse. Scouting reports just came in. Monster swarms are converging on the academy. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They'll be here within the hour." Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through Leo. He'd seen monsters before, the twisted, system-spawned creatures that had overrun the world after the apocalypse. But he'd always been hiding, running, not standing on some front line. "What do they want from me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "They think you can help," Elena said, her gaze steady. "After yesterday, they believe you have power. Real power." Leo wanted to laugh, a hysterical bubble rising in his throat. Power? He had a glitched skill that turned trash into things the system mislabeled as divine. He was a fraud, a terrified college dropout playing at being a god. But the look in Elena's eyes, a mix of hope and something deeper, something like awe, stopped him. She believed, too. They all did. He followed her through the academy's labyrinthine halls, the air growing thicker with tension with every step. Students and faculty hurried past, their faces pale, voices hushed. The command center was a cavernous room dominated by a massive holographic map floating in the center, flickering with red dots that swarmed like angry insects toward the academy's blue outline. Dean Eris, a stern woman with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing, stood before it, flanked by other high-ranking awakened. "Leo," the dean said, not turning from the map. "Your performance yesterday was unprecedented. The system disruptor field suggests you can manipulate the system itself. We need that now." Leo swallowed, his mouth dry. "I don't control it. It just happens." "Then make it happen again," a burly man in tactical gear snapped. He was Commander Vance, head of the Academy's defenses. "We have reports of Gormaws, Shadow Stalkers, and Rock Tusks in the swarm. Our barriers won't hold against that many. We need an edge." Elena stepped forward. "Leo, if you can craft something, anything, to slow them down, it could give us time to evacuate the noncombatants." Leo's mind raced. Craft something? From what? He glanced around the room, his eyes landing on a potted plant in the corner, its leaves limp and dusty. Next to it, a decorative stone paperweight sat on a desk. A rock and a leaf. The most mundane things imaginable. His synthesis master skill tingled in his mind, a faint pulse of energy. He could combine them. But what would it make? Another mislabeled trinket? What if it failed, and they all saw through him? I need materials," he stammered, playing for time. Dean Eris gestured impatiently. "Use what's here. We don't have time for delicacy." Leo walked to the plant, his hands trembling. He plucked a dry leaf, its edges brittle. Then he picked up the paperweight, a smooth gray stone about the size of his palm. He held them both, feeling the absurdity of it all. A leaf and a rock. Against a monster swarm. This was how his charade would end, not with a bang, but with a pathetic fizzle. He closed his eyes, focusing on the skill. In his mind's eye, he saw the two items merge, their essences intertwining. A green light, faint but steady, glowed between his palms. The leaf seemed to melt into the stone, wrapping around it like a second skin, veins of emerald tracing across the gray surface. The process took only seconds, but to Leo, it felt like an eternity. When he opened his eyes, he held a small, leafy rock, as his skill interface labeled it. But even as he thought the name, the system notification flashed before him, golden text burning in his vision. Nature's Wrath Totem, forged. Item grade, divine. Effect, summons entangling vines upon impact, binding targets with nature's fury, ***. Leo almost dropped it. Divine. It was a rock with a leaf stuck to it. But the weight in his hand felt different now, warmer, pulsing with a low hum of energy. He could feel it, a faint thrum that resonated with something deep in the earth. Was it real? Or was the system's glitch getting worse, infecting his own perceptions? Well? Commander Vance demanded. What is it? Leo held it up, the leafy surface catching the light. It's a totem. It might entangle the monsters. He didn't dare say the system's name for it. Dean Eris studied him, her eyes narrowed. Take it to the eastern wall. That's where the first wave will hit. Elena, go with him. Protect him. Elena nodded, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. Come on, Leo. Let's see what your totem can do. The walk to the eastern wall was a blur of noise and motion. The academy was a fortress, its walls 30 feet high and reinforced with system-enhanced barriers, but now they seemed flimsy against the approaching tide. Awakened soldiers lined the battlements, their spells and weapons at the ready. Below, in the courtyard, students huddled in groups, their faces etched with fear. Leo saw Kale among them, his arms crossed, watching Leo with a scowl that hadn't faded since the duel. As they climbed the stone steps to the wall, the air grew colder, thick with the scent of ozone and decay. In the distance, a dark mass moved across the barren landscape, the monster swarm. Gormaws, with their gaping maws and serrated teeth, loped forward on twisted limbs. Shadow stalkers slithered between them, their forms flickering in and out of visibility. And behind them, hulking rock tusks, their stone hides grinding together, shook the ground with each step. By the system, Elena breathed, her knuckles white on her sword. There are so many. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. He clutched the leafy rock, the Nature's Wrath Totem, so tightly his fingers ached. What if it did nothing? What if he threw it, and it just plopped into the dirt, and everyone saw him for the fraud he was? He'd be torn apart by monsters, or worse, by the people he'd deceived. Commander Vance bellowed orders from further down the wall. Archers, fire. Mages, concentrate on the rock tusks. We need to break their charge. Arrows streaked through the air, followed by bursts of fire and ice. The front ranks of monsters fell, but more poured in, relentless. A Gormaw leaped, its claws scrabbling at the wall, only to be blasted back by a lightning spell. But they were getting closer. Too close. Leo, now. Elena shouted over the din. Leo didn't think. He just acted. He drew back his arm, the totem feeling heavier than it should, and hurled it over the wall. It arced through the air, a small, unassuming object against the backdrop of chaos. For a moment, nothing happened. It landed in the midst of the advancing monsters with a soft thud, rolling to a stop against a Gormaw's foot. Leo's breath caught. Failure. It was all failure. Then the earth erupted. Vines, thick as tree trunks and glowing with a vibrant green light, burst from the ground where the totem had landed. They shot upward, wrapping around monsters with terrifying speed. Gormaws roared as they were ensnared, their struggles only tightening the coils. Shadow stalkers flickered, trying to phase through, but the vines seemed to pulse with anti-magic energy, holding them fast. Even the rock tusks staggered, vines crawling up their stone legs, rooting them in place. The swarms advanced ground to a halt, a tangle of thrashing bodies and emerald tendrils. The air filled with the sounds of snapping branches and monstrous shrieks. On the wall, the defenders stared in stunned silence. Then a cheer went up, ragged but fierce. He did it, someone yelled. The war god did it. Leo leaned against the parapet, his legs weak. He watched as the vines continued to grow, spreading out from the totem like a living net, entangling more monsters with each passing second. It was working. Actually working. But why? Was it the system's glitch, making it seem powerful? Or was there something more? He could feel a faint pull, a connection to the totem, as if the belief of the people around him, their awe, their hope, was feeding into it, making it real. Elena turned to him, her eyes wide, not with the awe of before, but with something sharper, more probing. The battle still raged around them, arrows flew, spells flashed, monsters howled, but in that moment, it all faded to a distant hum. She stepped closer, her voice low, barely audible over the chaos. "Leo," she said, her gaze locked on his. "What are you really?" Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. She wasn't asking about the totem or the duel. She was asking about him. The truth. The charade. The glitch. Leo opened his mouth, but no sound came out. How could he explain? That he was just a scared kid with a broken skill? That everything they believed was a lie built on a system error? Before he could answer, a deafening roar split the sky. From the heart of the swarm, a monster larger than the rest broke free of the vines, a rock-tusk alpha, its hide crackling with energy. It slammed into the wall, and the stone shuddered. Cracks spiderwebbed up from the impact point. "Breach!" Commander Vance yelled. "Fall back to the inner courtyard." Elena grabbed Leo's arm, pulling him away from the edge. "We have to go." As they retreated, Leo glanced back. The Nature's Wrath totem still glowed amidst the vines, holding back the tide, but the alpha was breaking through. His creation had bought them time, but it wasn't enough. And Elena's question echoed in his mind, a whisper beneath the roar of battle. What was he really? A fraud? A catalyst? Or something that was becoming real, fueled by the belief of everyone around him? He didn't know. But as he ran, the leafy rock's energy still humming in his veins, he feared the answer might be more terrifying than the monsters at the gate. The aftermath of the monster attack settled over Azure Dawn Academy like a heavy cloak. Leo stood at the edge of the training grounds, watching as teams of awakened students and faculty cleared away the remnants of the battle, shattered stone, scorched earth, and the occasional twisted vine from his leafy rock creation. The air still carried the acrid scent of ozone and burnt foliage, a stark reminder of how close they'd come to disaster. Elena's question from the day before echoed in his mind, "Leo, what are you really?" He hadn't answered, couldn't answer, because the truth was too absurd. He was just a college dropout with a glitched skill, not some divine being. Yet, as he looked around, he saw the way people glanced at him, a mixture of awe, reverence, and expectation. His makeshift totem had saved lives, and that act had cemented his growing legend. Leo. He turned to see Professor Eris, the stern-faced instructor who taught advanced system mechanics. The man's robes were smudged with dirt, but his expression was as composed as ever. "The dean has arranged a private workshop for you. Follow me." Leo's heart skipped a beat. A private workshop? That sounded like the kind of privilege reserved for S-rank hunters or master crafters, not someone who'd been synthesizing junk into divine artifacts. He fell into step beside the professor, his mind racing. Was this a reward or a trap? Would they expect him to produce more world-saving items on demand? They walked through the academy's central courtyard, past marble statues of legendary heroes from before the system apocalypse. Students paused in their activities to watch him pass, whispers trailing in his wake. "That's the war god, did you see the vines? They say he commanded nature itself." Leo kept his eyes forward, trying to ignore the weight of their stares. It was exhausting, this constant performance. The workshop was located in a secluded wing of the academy, away from the bustling dormitories and classrooms. Professor Eris stopped before a heavy oak door engraved with intricate runes. "This space has been warded for privacy and security. Only you and a few select faculty have access." He produced a key from his robe, a simple iron thing that seemed out of place in this world of glowing interfaces and magical artifacts, and unlocked the door. "Use it wisely. The Academy's resources are at your disposal, within reason." With that, the professor left, leaving Leo alone in the doorway. He stepped inside, and his breath caught. The workshop was larger than his old dorm room, with high ceilings and walls lined with shelves stocked with materials. There were jars of glowing powders, bundles of strange herbs, chunks of ore that shimmered in the dim light, and even mundane items like scraps of metal and bits of cloth. In the center of the room stood a sturdy workbench, its surface scarred from years of use. A single window, narrow and barred, let in a sliver of afternoon sun, casting long shadows across the stone floor. For a moment, Leo just stood there, overwhelmed. This was more than he'd ever had, a space of his own, tools, materials. But it also felt like a cage. The expectations were now tangible, embodied in every jar and every shelf. He walked to the workbench, running a hand over its rough surface. Dust motes danced in the sunbeam, and he noticed a thin layer of grime coating everything. The room hadn't been used in a while. Okay, he whispered to himself. Just keep up the act. Synthesize something, anything, and hope the system misinterprets it again. But a nagging thought had been growing since the battle. His creations, the sharp rock, the reinforced paperclip, the leafy rock, they weren't just being mislabeled. There was something more. When he'd thrown the leafy rock, he'd felt a faint pull, a connection to the vines that erupted. It was subtle, like a whisper at the edge of his consciousness, but it was there. Was his skill evolving? Or was it just the power of belief, as the system's glitch seemed to thrive on? He decided to test it. No grand gestures, no pressure from an audience. Just a simple, controlled experiment. He looked around the workshop, his eyes settling on a patch of dust in the corner, accumulated from neglect. He scooped up a handful, feeling its gritty texture. Then, he wiped his brow. The room was warm, and a bead of sweat trickled down his temple. He caught it on his finger, mingling it with the dust in his palm. Synthesis, he murmured, activating his skill. The familiar interface flickered before his eyes, translucent blue text overlaying his vision. Synthesis master, active. Materials detected, dust, common, human sweat, common. Proceed. He focused, willing the combination. There was no flash of light, no dramatic surge of energy. Just a gentle warmth in his palm, as the dust and sweat coalesced into a small, damp clump. It was unremarkable, barely holding together, like a sad ball of mud. But then the system notification flashed, bright and insistent. Synthesis complete, essence of mortal toil, divine tear. Description, a fragment imbued with the perseverance of mortal struggle. Grants minor stamina regeneration to the bearer. Log to global archives. Leo stared at the clump in his hand. Essence of mortal toil. Divine tear. It was dust and sweat. He almost laughed, but the laughter died in his throat. Because the clump was glowing. Faintly, a soft golden light pulsed from within, like a heartbeat. It was subtle, barely visible in the sunbeam, but it was there. He'd never seen his creations glow before. The sharp rock had been just a rock, the paperclip, just metal. This was different. He set the clump on the workbench, watching as the glow slowly faded, leaving behind what looked like a mundane lump of dirt. But when he picked it up again, he felt it, a faint, steady warmth that seeped into his skin. His fatigue from the battle seemed to lessen slightly, a gentle refreshment washing over him. It was real. The effect was minor, but it was real. Not just a system glitch, but actual power. It's evolving, he breathed, his mind racing. The skill wasn't just mislabeling things, it was starting to imbue them with genuine properties, fueled by, what? His own effort. The belief of others. He thought back to the battle, to the way everyone had looked at him when the vines erupted. Their awe, their hope, it had been palpable. Had that energy fed into his synthesis? He spent the next hour experimenting cautiously. He combined a piece of chalk and a bit of string from the shelves, creating a simple chalk-on-string pendulum. The system logged it as, pendulum of minor divination, rare tier, but it didn't glow, and when he tried to use it, it just swung aimlessly. No real power there. Then he tried a scrap of parchment and a drop of ink, synthesizing a smudged note. The system called it, scroll of fading memory, common tier, and it remained inert. It seemed the evolution was inconsistent. The dusty clump had been special, maybe because it involved a part of him, his sweat, or because he'd been in a moment of genuine reflection. He needed to understand the pattern. Was it about emotion? Intent? Or was it tied to the growing legend around him? As he pondered, the light outside the window began to fade, dusk settling over the academy. He lit an oil lamp on the workbench, its flame casting flickering shadows on the walls. The workshop felt both sanctuary and prison, a place where he could hide, but also where the pressure to perform simmered beneath the surface. He was so engrossed in his thoughts that he almost missed it. A flicker of movement at the window. He froze, his eyes darting to the narrow, barred opening. For a second, he saw nothing but the deepening twilight. Then a shadow shifted, just outside, a silhouette, humanoid, pressed against the bars. Someone was watching him. Leo's blood ran cold. He stayed perfectly still, his breath caught in his throat. The shadow didn't move again, but he could feel the weight of observation. After a long moment, he heard the faint scratch of something on parchment, a soft, deliberate sound. Then the shadow melted away, disappearing into the gathering dark. He rushed to the window, peering out. The courtyard below was empty, silent. No footsteps, no trace. But on the stone sill, just outside the bars, he saw a single, fresh mark, a small, smudged footprint in the dust. Someone had been there, taking notes. Clutching the essence of mortal toil in his hand, its faint warmth now feeling like a warning, Leo backed away from the window. His mind whirled with questions. Who was watching him? A rival, like Kale? A faculty member testing him? Or something more sinister? The private workshop wasn't just a privilege, it had made him a target, isolated and observable. The glow from the clump pulsed once, weakly, as if echoing his anxiety. His skill was evolving, but so were the dangers. He was no longer just a fraud trying to survive, he was becoming something real, and someone was taking notice. As the last light of day vanished, leaving him alone in the lamplit workshop, Leo knew one thing for certain: the charade was far from over, and the stakes had just gotten higher. The morning sun filtered through the high windows of Leo's private workshop, casting long shadows across the cluttered workbench. Dust motes danced in the beams of light, swirling around the various mundane objects he'd collected: broken utensils, scraps of metal, bits of string, and the faintly glowing dusty clump he'd created yesterday. The essence of mortal toil, as the system insisted on calling it, sat in a small ceramic dish, emitting a soft amber light that pulsed in time with Leo's heartbeat. He'd spent the night tossing and turning, the memory of that shadowy figure at his window haunting his dreams. Who had been watching him? And why? The footprint he'd found, a partial impression in the soft earth beneath the window, had been too smudged to identify, but it was definitely human. Someone was interested in his divine crafting, and that thought made his stomach churn with anxiety. Leo picked up the dusty clump, turning it over in his hands. The glow intensified slightly at his touch, and he felt a faint warmth spread through his fingers. Yesterday's realization still echoed in his mind: his skill was evolving. The system's misinterpretations weren't just random glitches anymore, they were starting to create actual effects. When he'd held the clump yesterday, he'd noticed his fatigue fading, a subtle regeneration of stamina that lasted for several minutes. It was minor, barely noticeable, but it was real. What are you really? Elena's question from days ago whispered through his thoughts. He still didn't have an answer. A sharp knock at the workshop door startled him. He nearly dropped the dusty clump, fumbling to set it back in the dish before calling out, "Come in." The door swung open to reveal Professor Eris, the Academy's stern-faced alchemy instructor. Behind him stood a man Leo had never seen before, tall, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped silver hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He wore military-style fatigues adorned with insignias Leo didn't recognize, and his posture was rigid, authoritative. "Leo," Professor Eris said, his voice unusually formal. "This is Commander Varek of the Azure Vanguard. He's here on behalf of the Council of Survivors." Leo stood up too quickly, knocking a spoon off the workbench. It clattered to the stone floor, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. Hello," he managed, wiping his sweaty palms on his trousers. Commander Varek stepped forward, his boots clicking against the stone. His gaze swept the workshop, taking in the clutter, the mundane objects, the glowing dusty clump. His expression remained impassive, but Leo saw the slight tightening around his eyes. "So this is where the war god crafts his miracles," Varek said, his voice deep and resonant. "I expected something more impressive." "Leo's methods are unconventional," Professor Eris interjected quickly. "But his results speak for themselves." "Do they?" Varek turned his full attention to Leo. "I've read the reports. The God-Sliver Shard of Eternity. The Aeon-Piercing Needle of Fate. The Reality-Binding Ribbon of Chaos. Impressive names for what appear to be ordinary objects." Leo's throat went dry. He could feel the weight of Varek's scrutiny, the unspoken doubt. This wasn't like the Academy students who watched with awe or the camp survivors who looked at him with hope. This man was calculating, analytical. Dangerous. "The system recognizes them as divine artifacts," Professor Eris said, a defensive edge to his voice. "Their effects are documented." "Effects that are inconsistent at best," Varek countered. "The needle destroyed a low-level slime creature. The ribbon did nothing but stretch when tested by your own alchemy department. The shard cured Elena's curse, yes, but we have no way of knowing if that was the artifact or some latent ability of her own." He took another step toward Leo. The council is planning a raid on the Crimson Spire. It's a dungeon that appeared 3 days ago, and it's already claimed 17 awakened. We need a weapon. A real one. Not parlor tricks or system glitches. Leo's mind raced. The pressure was a physical weight on his chest. He could feel his heart hammering against his ribs. I can try, he stammered. But my skill. Your skill is synthesis master, Varek interrupted. You combine items. So combine something. Create a weapon worthy of the titles the system gives you. Professor Eris placed a hand on Leo's shoulder. Leo, this is important. The Crimson Spire is spawning monsters that are breaching our outer defenses. If we don't clear it soon. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Leo looked around his workshop, his eyes darting from object to object. A weapon. A real weapon. But everything he touched turned into something absurdly named by the system. What if this time it didn't work? What if he created something truly useless, and Varek saw through the entire charade? His gaze fell on the spoon he'd knocked to the floor. Next to it, half buried in a pile of scrap metal, was a rusty nail. 2 mundane objects. Utterly ordinary. The kind of combination that had produced the sharp rock, his very first, divine artifact. Okay, Leo said, his voice barely above a whisper. He bent down, picking up the spoon and the nail. The spoon was cheap stainless steel, slightly bent. The nail was about 3 inches long, its tip dulled by age and rust. Varek watched, arms crossed. This is what you choose. A spoon and a nail. The combinations don't have to make logical sense, Professor Eris explained, though he sounded uncertain himself. The system interprets them. Leo ignored them both. He closed his eyes, focusing on the objects in his hands. He'd done this dozens of times now, but the process never became routine. There was always that moment of doubt, that fear that this time nothing would happen, that the glitch would fix itself and he'd be exposed as a fraud. He activated his skill. A faint blue light enveloped the spoon and nail, shimmering like heat haze. The objects began to vibrate, then melt into liquid form, swirling together in a vortex of light and metal. Leo concentrated, visualizing the synthesis. He didn't know what he was trying to create, just a weapon. Something that could help. The light intensified, bright enough to make both Varek and Professor Eris shield their eyes. Leo felt the familiar drain of energy, like a part of his stamina being pulled into the synthesis. Then, with a soft chime, the light faded. In his hands was a spork. But not quite. It had the bowl of a spoon, but one edge had been fused with the nail, creating a sharp, protruding point. The handle was a twisted amalgamation of both materials, ending in a crude point where the nail's head had been. It was ugly, unbalanced, and utterly ridiculous. For a long moment, no one spoke. Leo stared at the object, his heart sinking. This was it. This was the moment everything fell apart. Then the system notification flashed in his vision, the familiar golden text scrolling past. Synthesis complete. Item, divine implement of sustenance. Rarity, mythic. Description, a tool forged from humble origins, blessed by divine misunderstanding. Can pierce the veil between hunger and eternity. Leo almost groaned aloud. The description was as absurd as the object itself. Varek's expression darkened. A spork with a nail in it, he said flatly. This is your divine weapon. The system, Professor Eris began. I don't care what the system calls it. Varek snapped. Look at it. It's a joke. People are dying out there, and you're handing me cutlery. He snatched the spork nail from Leo's hands, holding it up disdainfully. The council warned me about this. They said you might be a fraud, that all this war god nonsense was just hysteria after the apocalypse. I defended you. I argued that the evidence. He broke off, shaking his head in disgust. I should have listened. Commander, please, Professor Eris said, stepping between them. Let's test it. The system has never been wrong before. Test it how? Varek demanded. Should I try to eat with it? Or maybe scratch an itch? His anger was a palpable force in the room. Leo could only stand there, frozen, watching his carefully constructed world crumble. This was worse than Kale's challenge, worse than the monster attacks. This was someone in real authority seeing through him. The training dummies, Professor Eris suggested desperately. In the courtyard. We can see if it has any combat application. Varek stared at the spork nail for another long moment, then sighed. Fine. But this is a waste of time. He turned and strode out of the workshop, the spork nail held loosely in one hand. Professor Eris gave Leo a worried look before following. Leo trailed behind them, his legs feeling like lead. The academy courtyard was empty at this hour, the morning training sessions having moved indoors due to the increased monster threats. A row of training dummies stood against one wall, straw-filled constructs reinforced with basic enchantments to simulate durability. They were used for weapon practice, capable of withstanding everything from sword strikes to low-level spells. Varek stopped in front of the first dummy. Well, he said, turning to Leo. How does your divine implement work? Do I stab with it? Throw it? Wish really hard? I don't know, Leo admitted. Sometimes the effects are unpredictable. Unpredictable, Varek repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He raised the spork nail, holding it like a dagger. Let's see, then. He stabbed forward, not with any real force, just a testing jab aimed at the dummy's chest. The moment the sharpened nail point touched the enchanted straw, everything changed. There was no sound. No flash of light. No dramatic explosion. The dummy simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, a human-shaped construct of straw and magic. The next, it was gone. Not destroyed, not torn apart, but erased. Where it had stood, there was nothing but empty air and a faint shimmer in the space, like heat rising from pavement on a summer day. The spork nail continued its motion, passing through empty space where the dummy had been. Varek stumbled forward, caught off balance by the lack of resistance. He stared at the spot where the dummy had been, then at the spork nail in his hand, his expression shifting from anger to shock to something approaching awe. Professor Eris gasped. By the system. Leo could only watch, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. The dummy was gone. Not just broken, gone. As if it had never existed. Varek slowly straightened, looking from the spork nail to the empty space to Leo. His earlier anger had vanished, replaced by a dawning realization. He took a step toward the next dummy, this time with deliberate care. He touched the spork nail to the second dummy's shoulder. Again, silence. Again, the dummy vanished without a trace, leaving only that faint shimmer in the air. Varek touched a third dummy. A fourth. Each time, the same result, instant, complete erasure. By the time he reached the fifth dummy, his hand was trembling slightly. He turned to face Leo, the spork nail held before him like a sacred relic. His eyes were wide, the earlier skepticism completely gone. What did you create? It was just a spoon and a nail, Leo whispered, the truth tumbling out before he could stop it. I didn't mean for this to happen. But Varek wasn't listening to his words. He was looking at him, really looking at him, for the first time. Not as a potential fraud, not as a confused student, but as something else entirely. The system called it the divine implement of sustenance, Professor Eris said, his voice hushed. Can pierce the veil between hunger and eternity. What if it doesn't just erase things? What if it consumes them? Sustenance. Varek looked down at the spork nail again, then back at Leo. Slowly, deliberately, he sank to one knee, bowing his head. The gesture was so sudden, so unexpected, that Leo took a step back. We are not worthy, Varek said, his voice thick with emotion. To doubt you, to question your divinity. Forgive my ignorance, war god. Leo stared at the kneeling commander, the spork nail glinting in the morning sun. The object in Varek's hand was just a spoon fused with a nail. He knew that. He'd made it himself. But it had erased 4 training dummies from existence. And the man who had come to expose him as a fraud was now kneeling at his feet. The weight of the moment settled over Leo, heavier than any monster attack, more terrifying than any duel. This wasn't just another misinterpretation by the system. This was something different. The dusty clump had glowed. This had erased things from reality. His skill was evolving faster than he'd realized. And with each divine creation, the charade deepened, the belief of others grew stronger, and the line between fraud and reality blurred a little more. Varek remained kneeling, head bowed, the spork nail offered up like a tribute. In the distance, Leo could hear the sounds of the academy coming to life, students heading to classes, guards changing shifts, the ever-present hum of defensive enchantments. But in this courtyard, there was only silence, and a man on his knees, and a god who didn't exist holding a spoon that shouldn't be possible. Leo reached out, his hand trembling as he took the spork nail from Varek's grasp. The metal was warm to the touch, humming with a power he couldn't understand. The system's description floated in his mind, can pierce the veil between hunger and eternity. What had he created? And more importantly, what was he becoming? The silence in Leo's workshop felt heavier than the reinforced steel door that had clicked shut behind Commander Varek. Dust motes danced in the slanted afternoon light filtering through the high, narrow windows that now felt more like prison bars than sources of illumination. Leo stood motionless in the center of the room, his fingers still tingling from where he'd held the spork nail. The divine implement of sustenance. The name echoed in his mind with a mocking grandeur that made his stomach churn. He looked down at his hands, ordinary hands, still bearing the faint ink stains from his pre-apocalypse college notes. How had they become the instruments of what everyone called miracles? The memory of Varek kneeling, his battle-scarred face pressed to the stone floor in reverence, sent a cold shiver down Leo's spine. "We are not worthy," the commander had whispered, the words vibrating with a terror-stricken awe that felt all wrong. "It was just a spoon and a nail," Leo muttered to the empty room, his voice barely more than a breath. But the training dummies, the way they'd simply ceased to exist, not even leaving ash behind, that hadn't been a system glitch. That had been real. Tangible. Terrifying. He paced the length of the workshop, his boots scuffing against the smooth granite floor. Shelves lined the walls, filled with the offerings the Academy had provided, glittering mana crystals, monster cores that pulsed with faint inner light, rare metals from dungeon delves. And in the corner, tucked away in a simple wooden crate, his own collection, broken pencils, crumpled candy wrappers, a chipped coffee mug, a handful of pebbles from the courtyard. The dichotomy was absurd. Why, he asked the silence. Why does it work? For weeks, he'd accepted the misunderstanding, a bug in the system, a cosmic joke that had somehow kept him alive. But now his creations were developing power. Actual power. The leafy rock had summoned vines. The glitchy device had nullified magic. And the spork nail had erased matter from existence. It was no longer just misinterpretation. Something was changing. Driven by a nervous energy, Leo crossed to the workshop's terminal, a sleek, crystalline interface embedded in the wall, glowing with soft blue light. The Academy's system access was limited for students, but as the war god, he'd been granted privileges that made the librarians green with envy. He tapped the screen, bringing up his personal logs. Synthesis Master, Skill Level. Recent Creations. Sharp Rock God Sliver Shard of Eternity. Reinforced Paperclip AEON-PIERCING Needle of Fate. Stretchy Wrapper Reality Binding Ribbon of Chaos. Skill Evolution Detected, Belief Resonance Integration, 12%. Leo froze, his breath catching. Belief Resonance Integration. The percentage glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. He'd never noticed that before. Had it appeared after Varek's visit? After the kneeling? His mind raced, connecting fragments, the awe in people's eyes, the whispers of war god, the way his creations seemed to grow stronger the more people believed in them. No, he whispered. It can't be that simple. But the thought took root, cold and insidious. What if his skill wasn't just glitched? What if it was feeding on something? He needed more data. Older data. With trembling fingers, he navigated away from his personal logs, delving into the Academy's archival systems. The interface resisted at first, flashing, access restricted, administrator clearance required. Leo gritted his teeth, thinking of Elena's advice from weeks ago, the system responds to intent, Leo. Sometimes you have to, ask like you deserve it. He straightened his shoulders, forcing a confidence he didn't feel. System, display historical logs related to synthesis anomalies. From the apocalypse onset. The terminal flickered, then relented. Lines of text scrolled past, dates and codes from the first chaotic days after the system descended. Most were garbled, fragments of failed integrations, corrupted data streams. But one entry, dated 3 days post-apocalypse, caught his eye. Reality Glitch Event Number 7, Sector Gamma 12. Anomaly, temporary local override of system protocols. Manifestation, unregistered skill, synthesis, produced artifact, broken locket heartstring of lost time, with chronodisplacement properties. Note, artifact potency correlated with witness belief levels. Hypothesis: reality glitch events may enable belief-based reality modulation. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. Belief-based reality modulation. The words seemed to burn themselves into his vision. He scrolled further, finding more scattered references: reality glitch event number 22, number 41, number 89, each describing similar phenomena, mundane items transformed into impossible things, always tied to moments of collective hope or desperation. Always fleeting, vanishing once the glitch passed. Except his glitch hadn't passed. It had stuck. And it was growing. He dug deeper, accessing subroutines buried under layers of encryption. The terminal's glow turned reddish, warning symbols flashing. Unauthorized access attempt, security protocols engaged. Leo ignored them, his curiosity now a frantic, clawing thing. He had to know. A final file, hidden behind a fractal firewall that made his eyes water to look at, yielded under his stubborn probing. It wasn't a system log. It was a message, plaintext, dated the exact moment the apocalypse began. The timestamp read, midnight, system integration initiation. The message was brief, etched in glowing, unstable characters that seemed to writhe on the screen. To the one who bends without breaking. The synthesis master is not a creator, he is a catalyst for belief. Reality is a consensus. You are the flaw that makes it listen. When enough souls whisper a truth, the system must echo it. But beware, every miracle borrows from the dreamers. And debts must be paid. Leo stumbled back from the terminal as if struck. The words echoed in the silent workshop, louder than any shout. Catalyst for belief. Not a creator. A flaw. He understood now, with a clarity that felt like falling. His skill, his pathetic joke of a power, wasn't making divine artifacts. It was taking the belief of others, the desperate hope of a shattered world, and reflecting it back through the system's framework. The more people believed he was a god, the more his creations became godlike. The spork nail hadn't erased those dummies because it was inherently powerful, it had erased them because Varek, in that moment, believed with every fiber of his being that it could. And the skill evolution, belief resonance integration. It was measuring how much of that belief he was absorbing. Channeling. Using. Every miracle borrows from the dreamers, Leo repeated, his voice hollow. And debts must be paid. What did that mean? What was the cost? His mind flashed to Elena, her curse lifted by the sharp rock. To the students who cheered his name. To Varek kneeling. Were they paying somehow? With their hope? Their faith? Their, something else? The workshop door hissed open, breaking his spiraling thoughts. Elena stood in the doorway, her silver hunter's armor gleaming under the corridor lights. She looked at him, her sharp eyes missing nothing, his pallor, the sweat on his brow, the way his hands clenched at his sides. Leo, she said, stepping inside. I heard about Varek. The whole academy's buzzing. They're saying you crafted a weapon that unmade reality. He tried to smile, but it felt like a crack in glass. Just a spoon and a nail, Elena. She closed the door, her movements quiet. That's not what the system says. And that's not what Varek believes. She paused, studying him. You look like you've seen a ghost. I found something, he said, gesturing weakly at the terminal. The message still glowed there, ominous and undeniable. Elena approached, her brow furrowed as she read. Her breath caught. Catalyst for belief, she murmured. Is this what you are? I don't know, Leo admitted, running a hand through his hair. But it makes sense. None of this works unless people believe it does. The more they believe, the more real it becomes. I'm not a god, Elena. I'm a mirror. A focus. She was silent for a long moment, her gaze distant. Then she said, when I touched your sharp rock, Leo, I felt something. A warmth. Like hope given shape. I believed, in that moment, that I could live. And I did. She met his eyes. If that's what this is, if you're taking our belief and making it real, then maybe that's not a flaw. Maybe it's what we need. But the debt, Leo insisted, pointing at the last line. What does it mean? What am I borrowing? What happens when it's time to pay? Elena shook her head. I don't know. But hiding from this won't change it. The world believes you're the war god, Leo. And right now, that belief is holding back the monsters. It's giving people courage. If you stop. She trailed off, but the implication hung between them: if he stopped, the fragile hope he'd inspired might crumble. And in a world like this, hope was the last line of defense. Leo turned away, staring at his collection of junk in the corner. A broken phone. A candy wrapper. A pebble. So ordinary. So meaningless. Yet in his hands, they became legends. Because people needed legends. "What do I do?" he whispered, more to himself than to her. Elena placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm. "You keep going. You learn. You understand this power. And you find out what the debt is before it comes due." She squeezed gently. "You're not alone in this, Leo. I believe in you. Not as a god. As you." Her words should have comforted him. Instead, they felt like another weight. Because now her belief was part of it too, fuel for the catalyst. He nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. After she left, Leo remained at the terminal, the message burning in his vision. Catalyst for belief. The words felt like a sentence. A destiny he'd never asked for. He thought of the upcoming raid on the Crimson Spire, of the lives depending on his miracles. He thought of the belief resonance integration, 12% and climbing. How high would it go? What happened at 100%? And in the back of his mind, a new fear took shape: if he was borrowing belief, who was the lender? And what would they ask for in return? The workshop grew dark as the sun set, the shadows lengthening across the floor. Leo didn't move. He just stared at the message, feeling the truth of it settle into his bones. He wasn't a creator. He was a catalyst. And the world's desperate faith was the alchemy that turned his trash into treasure. But alchemy, he remembered from half-forgotten classes, always demanded an equivalent exchange. And somewhere, in the deep code of the system or the fractured heart of reality itself, a debt was ticking upward. The workshop felt smaller than ever, its stone walls pressing in on Leo like the jaws of a trap. Dust motes danced in the slanted afternoon light filtering through the high, narrow window, the same window where, just days ago, he'd glimpsed a shadowy watcher. Now, that shadow had a name: Kale. Leo stared at the workbench, cluttered with the detritus of his charade. A bent spoon lay beside a nail, remnants of the divine implement of sustenance. A candy wrapper, now just a crumpled piece of foil, sat next to a rubber band. To anyone else, it was junk. To the system, it was divinity. But to Kale, it was proof. He'd come that morning, flanked by two stern-faced enforcers from the Academy's disciplinary council. Kale, with his sharp features and colder eyes, had always been the rival, the prodigy awakened with flame weaver abilities, who'd scoffed at Leo's reality-binding ribbon in class. Now, he held a data slate, its screen glowing with system logs. "I've analyzed every one of your so-called artifacts, Leo," Kale had said, his voice dripping with contempt. "The God-sliver shard, the Aeon-piercing needle, even this essence of mortal toil." He gestured to the dusty clump Leo had synthesized from sweat and dust, which still sat in a corner, glowing faintly with the eerie light of his evolving skill. "They have no inherent power. None. Their effects only manifest when others believe they will." Leo's heart had hammered against his ribs. He tried to protest, to summon the bluster he'd used with Commander Varric, but the words died in his throat. Because Kale was right. The hidden message from the system logs echoed in his mind: "You are not a creator, you are a catalyst for belief." Every miracle he'd crafted had been borrowed from the faith of others, reflected and amplified through the glitched system. "The council has reviewed my findings," Kale continued, a smug smile playing on his lips. "They agree it's heresy. To claim divine power, to deceive the desperate, it's a crime punishable by execution." Elena, who'd been standing guard outside, had burst in then, her hand on the hilt of her sword. "Kale, this is madness. Leo saved my life. He's helped defend the Academy." "He's helped nothing," Kale snapped. "He's a fraud, feeding off our hope. But I'll give him a chance to prove me wrong." He'd turned back to Leo, eyes gleaming. "A public trial. In the main courtyard, tomorrow at noon. Craft something, anything, that works without anyone's belief. No audience, no witnesses who think you're a god. Just you, your skill, and the truth. If it fails, you die. If you refuse, you die." Now, hours later, the ultimatum hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Leo slumped onto a stool, his hands trembling. The workshop was silent except for the distant hum of the Academy's energy barriers and the frantic beat of his own pulse. He glanced at his skill interface, floating in his vision like a ghostly overlay. Synthesis Master, glitched. Rank, evolving. Belief Resonance Integration, 42%. Available synthesis, 2 items, any category. Warning, catalytic function active. Power scales with collective belief. Debt incurred, unknown, ***. The numbers taunted him. 42%, how much of that was Elena's unwavering faith? The camp survivors' desperate hope. The Academy's awe. And what was the debt? The message had warned, every miracle borrows from the dreamers. Was he stealing something from them? Their will. Their very souls. He thought of the sharp rock, the stick and pebble he'd combined in a moment of panic. It had cured Elena's curse because she'd believed it would. The paperclip had slain a monster because the camp believed it was the AEON-piercing needle. Even the leaf and rock that summoned vines had worked because the defenders believed in nature's wrath. Without that belief, they were just objects. How do I make something that works on its own? He whispered to the empty room. His voice cracked. I'm not a god. I'm a college dropout who got lucky with a glitch. The door creaked open, and Elena slipped inside. She'd changed out of her armor into simple trousers and a tunic, her dark hair tied back. Her expression was grim, but her eyes held a stubborn light. Leo. We need to talk. There's nothing to talk about, he said, not looking up. Kale's right. I'm a fraud. You should have let me die in that dorm. Don't say that. She crossed the room, her boots scuffing on the stone floor. She pulled up another stool and sat facing him. I've seen what you can do. It's real. Maybe it's not what everyone thinks, but it saved lives. Because you believed it would. He finally met her gaze, his own eyes burning with frustration. Elena, don't you get it? My skill is a mirror. It shows people what they want to see. If no one believes, it's just synthesis. A slightly better version of garbage. She leaned forward, her voice low and intense. Then make them believe something else. Make them believe in you, not as a god, but as something real. Kale's trial is a trap. He wants you to fail because he's jealous. He's always been the star here, and you showed him up. Leo shook his head. It doesn't matter why. He has the data. The council will be watching. If I synthesize something and it just sits there, doing nothing, they'll execute me on the spot. Then we find another way. Elena stood, pacing the small space. What about the system logs you found? The reality glitch events. If belief can alter reality, maybe you can tap into that directly. Without needing an audience. He thought of the hidden message, the synthesis master is a catalyst. The catalyst didn't create, it enabled. It lowered the barrier for reaction. What if he could catalyze something within the system itself? Not an artifact for others, but a glitch? A temporary alteration? His eyes drifted to the workbench. Among the junk was a small, cracked hand mirror he'd scavenged from the ruins weeks ago. Next to it lay a shard of glass from a broken window. Both were mundane, worthless. But what if he combined them? A mirror and glass, reflection and fragmentation. In the right context, with the right belief. I have an idea, he said slowly, the words tasting like ash. But it's risky. If it fails, it'll just look like more junk. What is it? Elena asked, stopping her pacing. I don't know yet. But I need to try. He reached for the mirror and the glass shard, his hand steadier now. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but beneath it, a spark of defiance ignited. Kale wanted to expose him. Fine. But Leo wouldn't go down without a fight. He activated his skill. The familiar tingling spread through his fingers, a sensation that had once felt like hope and now felt like a sentence. The mirror and glass shard glowed with a soft, golden light, the system's acknowledgement. He focused, not on what others might believe, but on the truth he'd uncovered. He was a catalyst. A bridge between belief and reality. Synthesize, he whispered. The items melted together, swirling into a pool of light. It coalesced into a new object, a larger, jagged shard of glass with a mirrored surface. It looked ordinary, almost crude. No divine aura, no pulsing energy. Just a piece of reflective glass. But the system notification flashed in his vision. Reflective shard, synthesized. System log, item registered as mundane. No anomalous properties detected. Leo's heart sank. Without belief, it was nothing. He picked it up, feeling its cool, smooth surface. In the mirror, he saw his own face, pale, anxious, with shadows under his eyes. Just a scared young man, not a god. Is that it? Elena asked gently. Yeah, he said, voice hollow. Just a shard. It won't work tomorrow. She placed a hand on his shoulder. Then we think of something else. We have until noon. But as Leo stared into the mirror, something shifted. His reflection seemed to waver, as if the glass were vibrating with a frequency only he could sense. The skill interface flickered. Belief resonance integration, 43%. Catalytic function, active. Debt incurred, belief fragments absorbed, ***. He blinked. The percentage had ticked up. Had he just catalyzed his own belief? The desperate hope that this might work. And belief fragments, was that the debt? Was he absorbing bits of people's faith, storing them like a battery? A knock at the door made them both jump. It was one of the enforcers, a grim-faced woman in academy robes. Leo. The council has set the terms. The trial will be held in the central courtyard. You may bring one item of your choosing, synthesized or not. No audience except the council and Kale. They will observe from a shielded booth to eliminate external belief interference. If the item demonstrates any power without their belief, you live. If not, she didn't finish. She didn't need to. After she left, Leo looked at the reflective shard in his hand. It still seemed ordinary. But the flicker in his interface gave him a sliver of hope. What if he wasn't just a passive catalyst? What if, with enough integrated belief, he could become an active one, shaping reality not through others' faith, but through his own understanding of the glitch? I'm taking this, he said to Elena, holding up the shard. But you said it won't work. I know. But it's all I have. He managed a weak smile. Besides, maybe I can reflect something back at Kale. His own doubts, his own fears. Elena nodded, though worry still creased her brow. I'll be there. Outside the courtyard. They won't let me in, but I'll be watching. As night fell, Leo stayed in the workshop, turning the shard over in his hands. He thought about the reality glitch events, moments when belief had briefly overwritten the system's rules. What if he could trigger one? Not with an artifact, but with the catalyst itself. The shard was just glass, but in the right context, with the right pressure. He fell into a fitful sleep at the workbench, dreams haunted by Kale's cold eyes and the specter of an executioner's block. When dawn came, gray and misty, he woke with a stiff neck and a resolve hardened by desperation. The central courtyard was a vast, open space of flagstones, surrounded by the academy's towering spires. At its center stood a simple wooden table. To one side, a transparent, energy-shielded booth housed the disciplinary council, three elderly awakened with stern expressions, and Kale, who watched with a smirk. Leo walked in alone, the reflective shard clutched in his sweaty palm. The air was cold, the silence oppressive. No cheers, no whispers of awe. Just the hum of the shield and the weight of judgment. Begin, Leo, Kale's voice echoed through a speaker. Show us your divine craft. Leo placed the shard on the table. It lay there, inert, catching the pale morning light. He took a deep breath, thinking of the catalyst, the glitch, the belief integrated into his skill. He didn't know if it would work. But he had to try. He reached out, not to the shard, but to the system itself, to the glitch that bound him. In his mind, he whispered, *I am the catalyst. Let this reflect the truth, *. And as Kale opened his mouth to mock, the shard began to glow. The night before the trial was the longest of Leo's life. He sat in his workshop, the reflective shard lying innocently on the workbench before him. It was just a piece of glass fused to a small mirror fragment, nothing special. He'd synthesized it hours ago, and the system had given its usual grandiose name, reflective shard. No divine titles, no epic descriptions. Just those two words, blinking in his interface like a taunt. Leo ran a hand through his hair, his fingers trembling. The workshop, usually a sanctuary, felt like a prison. Shelves lined with junk, broken electronics, discarded wrappers, pebbles, and twigs, seemed to mock him. These were the ingredients of his supposed divinity. Outside, the Azure Dawn Academy slept, but Leo knew tomorrow would bring judgment. He picked up the shard, turning it over. In the dim light of a single mana lamp, it reflected his own exhausted face, pale, dark circles under his eyes, a nervous twitch at the corner of his mouth. "What am I doing?" he whispered to the empty room. The previous summary flashed in his mind: Kale's exposure, the challenge, the realization about belief absorption. Leo had spent hours trying to understand the new text in his skill interface: belief absorption active, 0.3% debt. It was like his skill was collecting fragments of the faith others placed in him, storing them as some kind of energy. But what did it mean? Could it make this shard work without external belief? He placed the shard back on the bench, his heart pounding. The council had set up a shielded booth for the trial, a transparent barrier infused with anti-belief runes. They wanted to eliminate any chance of crowd influence, to test the item in pure isolation. Leo had seen it earlier, a small, enclosed space in the academy courtyard, shimmering with faint blue energy. Inside, only the item and its effects would matter. No cheers, no awe, no collective hope to fuel his creations. "It's over," he muttered, burying his face in his hands. But then, a memory surfaced, Elena's voice from weeks ago, when she'd first called him a god. "Sometimes, Leo, the truth isn't in what you see, but in what you're forced to face." He didn't understand it then, but now it echoed in his mind. The shard was reflective. What if it didn't need to do anything spectacular? What if its power was in showing something real? He stood up, pacing. His skill was evolving, yes, but it was still a glitch. A beautiful, terrifying glitch that turned trash into legend. Maybe this time, the legend would be about truth, not power. He glanced at the shard again. It caught the light, throwing a sliver of reflection onto the wall. For a moment, Leo thought he saw something shift in the glass, a flicker of color that wasn't there. He blinked, and it was gone. Wishful thinking, probably. Sleep didn't come. He spent the hours practicing what he'd say, how he'd present the shard. His mind raced with scenarios, the shard doing nothing, Kale laughing, the council condemning him. But deep down, a tiny spark of hope remained. His skill had never failed him when it mattered most. It had always misinterpreted, always exaggerated, but it had always produced something that, in some twisted way, worked. Dawn broke, casting pale light through the window. Leo dressed in the simple robes he'd been given at the academy, gray and unadorned, a stark contrast to the ornate garments of the elite. He pocketed the shard, its edges cool against his skin. The walk to the courtyard was a blur of nervous footsteps and echoing hallways. Students and faculty lined the paths, their whispers a cacophony of curiosity and doubt. "That's the war god. I heard he's a fraud. Kale's going to expose him." Leo kept his head down, focusing on the ground. The courtyard was packed. Hundreds had gathered, filling the stone plaza that usually hosted training exercises. At the center stood the shielded booth, a cube of transparent energy, about 10 feet on each side, humming softly. Inside, a simple wooden table waited. To the side, a raised platform held the council, 5 stern-faced elders in robes of authority, including the academy dean, a woman with sharp eyes named Lyra. Next to them stood Kale, his arms crossed, a smug smile on his face. Kale was tall, with angular features and an air of superiority that made Leo's stomach churn. Leo approached the booth, his legs like lead. The crowd fell silent as he stepped through the energy barrier, a tingling sensation washed over him, like static electricity. Inside, the world muted, the sounds of the courtyard became distant, and the pressure of hundreds of eyes felt less intense. He placed the reflective shard on the table, its surface gleaming under the morning sun filtering through the shield. Dean Lyra's voice, amplified by a spell, echoed into the booth. "Leo, known as the Synthesis Master, you have been challenged by Kale to prove the inherent power of your creations, independent of external belief. Present your item for examination." Leo took a deep breath. "This is a reflective shard," he said, his voice steadier than he expected. "Synthesized from a mirror fragment and a piece of glass." Kale stepped forward to the edge of the platform, leaning toward the booth. "Let's see it, then," he called, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Show us its divine might." Leo picked up the shard, holding it up so the council and crowd could see. It looked ordinary, just a jagged piece of reflective material. He turned it slowly, letting light play across its surface. Nothing happened. No glow, no energy, no miraculous effect. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "Is that it? Kale laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the silence. A piece of trash glass. This is what you call a creation. Leo, you're not a god, you're a con artist. Your so-called artifacts only work because people believe in them. In here, with the belief shield active, your fraud is exposed. He gestured dramatically, his confidence swelling. Leo felt a surge of panic. Kale was right, the shard was doing nothing. He could feel the weight of disappointment in the air. The council members exchanged glances, their expressions growing stern. Dean Lyra's eyes narrowed. But then, as Kale's mocking words hung in the air, something changed. The shard in Leo's hand didn't glow or emit power, instead, its surface seemed to ripple, like water disturbed by a stone. Leo stared at it, his breath catching. In the reflection, he didn't see his own face anymore. He saw Kale's, but distorted, the confident smirk wavered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty, then fear, then a deep, hidden doubt that Leo had never noticed before. Kale was still talking. Pathetic attempt to deceive us all. You've relied on the desperation of others, but here, in truth, you're nothing. His voice rose, but as he spoke, the shard's reflection shifted again. Now it showed images, Kale as a child, failing a basic magic test, Kale envying other students' powers, Kale lying awake at night, wondering if he'd ever be good enough. It was all there, reflected in the glass, not as literal scenes, but as emotional echoes, colors and shadows that conveyed the essence of Kale's insecurities. Leo realized what was happening. The shard wasn't reflecting light, it was reflecting truth. The truth of Kale's soul, his hidden doubts and fears. And because the booth shielded against external belief, it wasn't fueled by the crowd's faith. It was fueled by something else, the raw, unfiltered reality of the moment. Kale's own disbelief, his own inner turmoil, was powering the item. Look, Leo said softly, holding the shard higher. He didn't need to explain, the effect was becoming visible to others. The shard's surface had taken on a faint, ethereal sheen, and beams of colored light, indigo for anxiety, crimson for envy, gray for fear, began to emanate from it, not bright, but noticeable in the shielded space. Kale froze, his smirk vanishing. What is this trick? He snapped, but his voice wavered. He took a step back, as if physically pushed. The colored lights from the shard seemed to reach toward him, wrapping around his form in intangible tendrils. He staggered, clutching his chest. I feel. He gasped, his face paling. The reflections in the shard grew more intense, showing clearer glimpses, Kale's secret jealousy of Leo's sudden fame, his fear of being overshadowed, his own hidden belief that maybe, just maybe, Leo was something special after all. The crowd outside the booth stirred, their murmurs growing louder. They couldn't see the detailed reflections, but they could see Kale's reaction, the way he stumbled, the fear in his eyes. The council leaned forward, their expressions shifting from skepticism to shock. Dean Lyra stood up. The item is reacting, she said, her voice hushed. But not to external belief. It's reacting to him. She pointed at Kale. Leo lowered the shard, his hands trembling now with a different emotion, awe. The system interface in his mind flashed, the text updating in bold letters, reflective shard, has evolved. New designation, soul mirror of truth. Description, reflects the inner truths of those who doubt its maker, powered by the catalyst's own uncertainties. Grade, divine. He almost laughed. Of course. His skill had done it again, turned something simple into something profound. But this time, it wasn't about brute force or flashy magic. It was about truth, and truth, it seemed, could be a weapon too. Kale sank to his knees on the platform, breathing heavily. The colored lights from the shard faded, but the impact remained. He looked up at Leo, his eyes wide with a mix of horror and realization. You showed me. He whispered, unable to finish. The crowd erupted. Shouts filled the courtyard, some cheering for Leo, others yelling at Kale. He's a fraud. No, Kale exposed himself. The war god's item works. The energy was chaotic, but through the shield, Leo felt it distantly. He looked at the council. Dean Lyra met his gaze, then slowly nodded. The trial is concluded, she announced, her voice cutting through the noise. The item, soul mirror of truth, has demonstrated inherent power independent of external belief. Leo is vindicated. But as the word sank in, Leo's attention was pulled back to his system interface. Below the item description, new text flickered into existence, glowing with an eerie light, belief absorption active, 3.7% debt. Catalytic resonance detected. Evolution imminent. He stared at it, his heart pounding anew. The debt had jumped, from 0.3% to nearly 4%. And, catalytic resonance. What did that mean? Before he could ponder further, the crowd's reaction shifted. They weren't just turning on Kale, they were surging forward, their faith in Leo reignited, stronger than ever. He could feel it, even through the shield, a palpable wave of belief crashing against the barrier, and somehow, his skill was drinking it in, storing it. As guards escorted a shaken Kale away, Leo stepped out of the booth. The noise hit him like a physical force, but he barely noticed. His mind was racing. His skill wasn't just glitched, it was learning, adapting, feeding on the very myths it created. And with this new evolution, what would it become? He pocketed the soul mirror, its surface now cool and inert again, but in his mind, the flickering text promised a future more terrifying and wondrous than he'd ever imagined. The aftermath of the trial settled over Azure Dawn Academy like a heavy fog. Leo stood in his private workshop, the stone walls cold against his back as he stared at the flickering interface hovering before his eyes. The words burned in his vision. Belief absorption active. Catalytic resonance detected, 87%. Evolution imminent, 72 hours. Current belief debt, 4,892 units. He ran a trembling hand through his hair, the other clutching the soul mirror of truth, now just an ordinary-looking shard of glass in his palm. The crowd's roar still echoed in his ears, their sudden shift from suspicion to fervent belief a palpable force that seemed to vibrate through the very air. He could feel it now, a subtle hum beneath his skin, as if the collective hope and awe of thousands were being siphoned into him, feeding something hungry and ancient within his skill. "They think I'm a god," he whispered to the empty room, his voice cracking. "And now I'm starting to believe it too." The door creaked open, and Elena slipped inside, her S-rank hunter armor gleaming under the workshop's dim mage lights. Her expression was unreadable, a mix of awe and something darker, more questioning. She'd been quiet since the trial, watching him with those piercing blue eyes that had first seen divinity in a sharpened rock. "Leo," she said softly, closing the door behind her. "The council is convening. There's something you need to see." He turned, the shard clinking as he set it on a workbench littered with junk, broken tools, scraps of metal, a half-eaten sandwich from 2 days ago. What now? Another test? Another demand? Worse. Her hand went to the sword at her hip, a nervous gesture he'd come to recognize. Scouts just returned from the western wastes. They're calling it the World Devourer. A chill crawled up Leo's spine. The name alone carried weight, as if the system had imbued it with dread. What is it? A boss monster. Category, cataclysmic. Level estimate, unknown, but it's already consumed 3 outposts. It's moving this way. She stepped closer, her armor whispering with the movement. The Academy is mobilizing all forces. And the Council, they want you to craft something. A weapon. Something that can kill it. Leo's laugh was brittle, humorless. Of course they do. Because why wouldn't the reincarnated war god have a world-ending artifact lying around? He gestured to the clutter around them. Should I combine a toothpick and some lint? Maybe the system will call it the universe-unraveling splinter. Elena's expression didn't change. This isn't a joke, Leo. People are going to die. The Academy might fall. They're putting their faith in you. Faith, he echoed, the word tasting bitter. That's the problem, isn't it? It's all faith. None of this is real. But even as he said it, he felt the lie. The belief absorption counter ticked up to 4,893 units, a tiny increment fueled by Elena's unwavering gaze. His skill was evolving, drinking in their conviction, and somewhere deep down, he knew the creations were changing too. The soul mirror hadn't just reflected Kale's doubts, it had reacted, with a power that felt less like a glitch and more like something waking up. He sighed, running his fingers over a piece of chalk and a length of string left on the bench from some forgotten lesson. What do they expect me to make? Something that can harm a being that eats mountains, Elena said, her voice dropping to a whisper. They're desperate, Leo. And so am I. He picked up the chalk, white and brittle, and the string, ordinary twine frayed at the ends. In his hands, they felt insignificant, the debris of a world that had ended and left them with nothing but broken pieces. But wasn't that all he'd ever had? A stick and a pebble. A paperclip and wire. Junk transformed by misunderstanding into miracles. Okay, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Let's see what the system thinks this time. He closed his eyes, reaching for that strange inner space where his skill resided. It felt different now, warmer, brighter, as if lit by countless tiny stars of belief. The synthesis interface unfolded in his mind, 2 slots waiting. He placed the chalk in one, the string in the other. Synthesis initiated. Materials, chalk, common, string, common. Probability of enhancement, low. Catalytic resonance detected, applying belief modifier. The last line was new. Leo's breath caught as he felt the hum beneath his skin intensify, the 4,893 units of belief debt swirling into the process. The chalk and string in his hands began to glow, a soft white light that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. He could feel the collective hope of the academy, the students praying in the dorms, the soldiers sharpening blades, the council members arguing in hushed tones, all funneling into this moment, into his trembling fingers. The light brightened, then condensed. When it faded, he held a simple loop of string with a chunk of chalk tied to it, like a primitive pendulum. It looked utterly mundane. But the system notification flashed, searing his vision with golden text. Run of annihilation, forged. Rarity, divine. Effect, inscribes a rune of unmaking upon activation. Scope, variable. Charge, single use, ***. Warning, catalytic belief expenditure detected. Belief debt increased to 5,210 units, ***. Leo stared at the thing in his hand. The rune of annihilation. It felt cool, slightly powdery from the chalk. No aura of power, no terrifying energy, just string and chalk. And yet, the name alone made his stomach clench. Well? Elena asked, her eyes fixed on the creation. He showed her. The rune of annihilation. According to the system, it can inscribe a rune of unmaking. Whatever that means. She reached out, then hesitated. Can I? He handed it over. Her fingers brushed his, and he felt that hum again, stronger now. She held the chalk string up, studying it with a hunter's critical eye. How does it work? I have no idea, Leo admitted. It says single use, variable scope. Maybe you, swing it. Draw with it. A sudden commotion outside made them both jump. Shouts echoed through the stone corridors, followed by the clang of alarm bells, deep, resonant tones that shook dust from the ceiling. Elena's face paled. That's the full mobilization signal. It's here. She thrust the rune back into his hands and yanked the door open. The workshop spilled out into a chaotic hallway, students running in armor, mages chanting preparatory spells, the air thick with the ozone scent of magic and fear. Through a high window, Leo saw the sky darkening, not with clouds, but with a swirling, vortex-like distortion miles away, tinged with sickly green light. Dean Arcturus appeared at the end of the hall, his robes flowing as he strode toward them, face grim. Leo. Elena. To the walls, now. The World Devourer is at the outer defenses. We have minutes at best. Leo clutched the chalk string, his knuckles white. I made something. The rune of annihilation. The dean's eyes widened, then narrowed with something like hunger. Good. Bring it. You'll hand it to our best striker, Elena, you'll carry it. We need to hit the creature's core. Scouts say it's protected by layered reality distortions. They moved, swept up in a tide of bodies flowing toward the academy's outer ramparts. The stone floors vibrated with each step, a deep, rhythmic thrum that Leo realized was the monster's footsteps. It's shaking the ground from miles away, he thought, panic clawing at his throat. They emerged onto the high walls, the wind whipping at their clothes. Below, the academy's forces arrayed, ranks of armored warriors, mages floating on platforms, siege engines humming with energy. And beyond the last barrier, in the shattered plains, stood the World Devourer. Leo's breath caught. It was like a living mountain, a grotesque fusion of scales, tentacles, and jagged rock, towering so high its head scraped the swirling green vortex in the sky. Its body pulsed with dark light, and where it stepped, the earth crumbled into void. One eye, massive as a lake, glowed with malevolent intelligence, fixed on the academy. By the system, Elena breathed beside him, her hand going to her sword. Dean Arcturus shouted orders, his voice amplified by magic. Mages, barrier reinforcement. Archers, aim for the eye. Leo, The rune, now. Leo turned to Elena, pressing the chalk string into her hand. Her fingers closed around it, and he felt that transfer of belief again, sharp and sudden. The crowd on the walls, soldiers, students, teachers, all watching him. Their hope was a physical pressure, swelling the belief debt to 5,500 units. The catalytic resonance in his interface ticked up to 94%. Elena, he said, his voice barely audible over the wind. I don't know if this will work. She met his eyes, and for a moment, he saw the woman who touched his sharp rock and lived. It will, she said, simple and certain. Because you made it. She turned, leaping from the wall with grace that defied her armor, landing on a lower battlement where a team of strikers assembled. Leo watched, heart hammering, as she conferred with them, pointing at the monster's chest where a faint, pulsing glow suggested a core. The World Devourer roared. The sound was beyond noise, it was a physical force that hit the walls like a tidal wave. Stone cracked. Soldiers stumbled. Leo grabbed the parapet to keep from falling, his ears ringing. The monster took a step forward, and the ground shook so violently the entire fortress seemed to lurch. Elena and the strikers launched into motion, a coordinated blur of speed and magic. They wove through artillery fire, dodging tentacles that lashed from the monster's sides. Leo lost sight of them in the chaos, his eyes darting between the battle below and his skill interface, where the evolution countdown now read, 71 hours. So close, yet an eternity away. A flash of light, Elena, soaring on a gust of wind magic, the chalk string held high. She swung it in a wide arc, and for a terrible second, nothing happened. Then the chalk glowed. Not the soft white from the workshop, but a blinding, actinic blue. It left a trail in the air, a shimmering line of light that didn't fade. Elena carved a symbol, a complex, spiraling rune that hung before the monster's chest, burning with contained power. The system notification flashed in Leo's vision, visible only to him. Run of Annihilation, activated. Rune of Unmaking inscribed. Scope, maximum. Catalytic belief surge detected, ***. The rune pulsed once, twice. The World Devourer shuddered, its eye widening. Then the rune exploded inward, not with fire or sound, but with a silent unraveling. Space itself seemed to twist around the monster's core, layers of distortion peeling away like old skin. The creature screamed, a sound of pure agony that shattered the remaining windows in the academy. But it didn't die. The rune faded, leaving a gaping, smoking wound in the monster's chest, but the core still glowed, dimmer now but intact. The World Devourer staggered, then righted itself, its eye blazing with renewed fury. It had been hurt, badly, but not killed. Elena landed back on the walls, breathing heavily, the chalk string now just ordinary twine with a crumbled nub of chalk. She looked at Leo, her expression stricken. It wasn't enough. Dean Arcturus roared in frustration. Again. Craft something else, Leo. Now. But Leo was already staring at his hands, at the interface. The belief debt had spiked to 6,000 units. The catalytic resonance, 96%. The evolution countdown, 70 hours. The rune of annihilation had worked, it had truly harmed the monster, fueled by their belief, but it hadn't been the instant victory they'd prayed for. And the World Devourer was moving again, faster now, enraged. It lowered its head, maw opening wide, a cavern of teeth and darkness aimed directly at the section of wall where Leo stood. The roar that followed shook the fortress to its foundations, stones grinding, people screaming. The monster's breath smelled of ozone and decay, and its eye locked on Leo, as if it knew, somehow, who had heard it. Elena grabbed Leo's arm, pulling him back as the wall trembled. Leo! He looked from her terrified face to the advancing horror, the chalk dust still on his fingers, the system's words burning in his mind, evolution imminent. And as the monster roared again, shaking the fortress walls with a sound that promised oblivion, he knew. This was only the beginning. The fortress walls trembled as if the very stone wept in terror. Dust rained from the ceiling of the command balcony where Leo stood frozen, his knuckles white where they gripped the railing. Below, in the academy's central courtyard turned battleground, chaos reigned. Elena moved with the grace of a storm. Her S-rank hunter's armor, once gleaming silver, now scored with black burns, flashed as she danced between the World Devourer's thrashing limbs. In her hand, the chalk string glowed with an ethereal light, a humble length of classroom chalk tied to a frayed piece of twine that now pulsed like a captured star. Leo's creation. The system's label hung in his vision, a phantom overlay on reality, rune of annihilation. Use it, he'd shouted to her minutes ago, his voice lost in the monster's roar. Now, he watched as she swung the string in a wide arc, its tip tracing lines of burning gold in the air. Each movement left behind a hovering, intricate symbol, a rune that shimmered with power Leo could feel in his teeth. The air hummed, charged with ozone and something deeper, something like collective hope. "It's working," whispered Professor Eris beside him, her glasses askew. The elderly scholar of system mechanics had insisted on staying on the balcony to observe. "The rune, it's not just light. It's interacting with the system's fabric. Look." Leo looked. The first rune, a complex knot of angles and curves, flared as the world devourer's massive tail, a limb of scaled darkness thicker than a bus, swept toward it. Contact. A sound like shattering glass echoed across the courtyard, followed by the monster's shriek of pain. Where the rune touched, the scales blackened and cracked, oozing a viscous, shadowy fluid that smoked where it hit the ground. The tail recoiled, leaving a gaping wound that bled not blood, but fragments of distorted space. "Yes," cried a soldier from the ramparts, her voice raw with triumph. Around Leo, the defenders, a mix of academy students, awakened hunters, and military remnants, cheered. Their belief was a palpable force, a warmth that pressed against Leo's skin. He felt it seep into him, a strange energy that tingled at the edges of his consciousness. His skill interface, still hovering in his mind's eye, flickered. The text, "Belief absorption active," glowed brighter, and below it, a new line appeared, "Catalytic resonance, 74%. What does that mean?" Leo muttered, but there was no time to ponder. Elena was already moving again, her face a mask of fierce concentration. She dodged a swipe of the monster's claw, each talon was the length of a man, curved and gleaming like obsidian, and spun, the chalk string whirling around her. Another rune formed, this one different, a spiral that pulsed with deep blue light. She flung it forward, and it shot toward the world devourer's head. The monster, a behemoth of nightmare anatomy, turned its gaze. It had no eyes, only pits of swirling void that seemed to drink the light around them. A maw lined with rows of crystalline teeth gaped, and from it issued a roar that wasn't sound so much as a pressure wave of pure malice. The rune struck its forehead. For a moment, nothing. Then, light. Blinding, furious light erupted from the point of impact, cascading over the monster's form in waves of azure energy. The world devourer staggered, its massive body listing to one side. Cracks spiderwebbed across its carapace, glowing with the same blue fire. The ground shook as it took a step back, its roar now tinged with something new, pain, and rage. "It's hurt," shouted Commander Jax, the military leader coordinating the defense from the balcony. "Keep pressing. All units, focus fire on the weakened sections." Arrows enchanted with frost, bolts of lightning from awakened mages, and volleys of artillery shells rained down on the monster. But Leo's eyes were fixed on Elena. She landed lightly on a shattered pillar, breathing hard. The chalk string in her hand was dimming, the glow fading to a faint shimmer. She looked up at the balcony, her eyes meeting Leo's. In them, he saw not awe this time, but a desperate question: is this enough? It wasn't. The world devourer straightened, the cracks in its body sealing with a sickening slurp of reforming shadow. The blue light faded, absorbed into its darkness. Its void pits turned toward Elena, and then, slowly, deliberately, toward Leo. A chill seized Leo's heart. He'd felt the monster's attention before, but this was different. This was recognition. The creature knew who had crafted the weapon that hurt it. Knew the source of this irritating power. "Leo, get down." Professor Eris grabbed his arm, but he couldn't move. His mind raced. The chalk string had worked, truly worked. It hadn't just been a placebo effect or a system glitch misinterpretation. The runes had damaged the monster, visibly, physically. And as he watched the defenders cheer, as he felt their belief swell like a tide, he understood. His skill interface flickered again, catalytic resonance, 89%. "It's the belief," he whispered, the realization dawning with terrifying clarity. "My creations, they're becoming real. The more people believe in them, the more power they have. The system's glitch started it, but now it's feeding on that belief. Making it tangible." He remembered the hidden message he'd found: the synthesis master is not a creator, he is a catalyst for belief. At the time, it had seemed like cryptic nonsense. Now, it felt like a prophecy unfolding in real time. His synthesis skill was evolving, absorbing the faith of others and using it to bridge the gap between mundane materials and miraculous effects. The chalk string wasn't just chalk and string anymore, it was a focus for the collective hope of everyone watching, a conduit for their desperate need for a savior. And they believed Leo was that savior. The World Devourer took a step forward, then another. Each footfall cratered the courtyard stone. It ignored the renewed barrage of attacks, its form shimmering as spells dissipated against a growing aura of negation. It was coming for him. Fall back. Protect the balcony. Commander Jax barked orders, but the monster's advance was relentless. Elena leapt from her perch, the chalk string flaring one last time as she drew a hasty rune in the air, a barrier of shimmering light that sprang up between the monster and the fortress. The World Devourer slammed into it, and the barrier held for a heartbeat before shattering into a million glittering fragments. The backlash sent Elena tumbling through the air, her armor scraping against stone as she landed hard. Elena! Leo cried out, his voice finally breaking through his paralysis. He took a step toward the railing, but Professor Eris held him back. You can't go down there, Leo. You're the target. I have to do something. The string isn't enough, it needs more power. His mind raced. Catalytic resonance, 92%. It was rising with every second, with every prayer whispered by the defenders, with every hopeful glance shot his way. But it wasn't at 100%. Not yet. What would happen when it reached full resonance? Would the chalk string become truly annihilating? Or would it be too late? The World Devourer reached the base of the fortress. It didn't bother with the gates. One massive claw dug into the stone wall, and it began to climb, its bulk scaling the side with terrifying speed. Cracks spread from its grip, and the entire structure groaned in protest. Soldiers on the ramparts fired point blank, but their attacks might as well have been raindrops against a mountain. It's coming up the wall, someone screamed. Leo's breath came in short gasps. He could see the monster's maw clearly now, a yawning chasm of crystalline teeth that seemed to fracture the light around them. Each tooth was a shard of captured nightmare, and deep within the throat, a vortex of swirling darkness pulsed with malevolent intent. It was going to swallow the balcony whole. Swallow him whole. He looked at his hands. They were trembling. A month ago, he'd been a college dropout hiding in a dorm, combining sticks and pebbles to make sharp rocks. Now, he was the focal point of a battle against an apocalyptic monster, with the faith of hundreds weighing on his shoulders. The absurdity of it almost made him laugh, but the fear was too thick, too real. Leo, Professor Eris said, her voice surprisingly calm. Your skill. It's evolving, isn't it? You can feel it. He nodded, unable to speak. Then trust it. The belief isn't just power, it's a connection. They believe in you. Use that. Use it how? He had no other items on him. No chalk, no string, no junk to synthesize. Just his clothes, his racing heart, and the overwhelming terror. But as the World Devourer's head crested the balcony railing, its void pits locking onto him, Leo felt the catalytic resonance spike, 98%. The monster's maw opened wide. A roar built from deep within, a sound that promised oblivion. The crystalline teeth gleamed, and the vortex in its throat spun faster, pulling at the air, pulling at Leo's very soul. He could see his reflection in those teeth, a pale, wide-eyed young man who looked nothing like a god. But in that moment, he remembered Elena's touch when the sharp rock cured her curse. He remembered the crowd's cheers when the reflective shard exposed Kale's doubts. He remembered the hope in the soldiers' eyes as they watched the runes burn the monster. Their belief was a tapestry, and he was the thread holding it together. Catalytic resonance, 100%, his interface flashed. The World Devourer lunged. Time slowed. Leo didn't move, didn't scream. He simply stood there, and as the maw descended, vast enough to engulf the entire balcony, he felt the belief of every defender converge upon him. It wasn't just energy, it was a chorus of voices in his mind, 1,000 whispers of, save us, protect us, you are our hope. The monster's teeth closed around the space where he stood. Darkness swallowed him whole. Darkness. Not the absence of light, but a tangible, suffocating presence that pressed against Leo's senses with the weight of a collapsing star. The World Devourer's maw had swallowed him whole, or so it seemed. For a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, he floated in a void where sound, sight, and even thought dissolved into static. Then, sensation returned in a violent rush. He was not dead. He was inside the monster. A cavernous space, vast and pulsating with sickly violet energy, stretched around him. The air, if it could be called air, thick with the stench of ozone and decay, burned his lungs with each ragged breath. Bioluminescent veins, like twisted arteries of corrupted light, snaked across walls of glistening, organic matter that throbbed in time with a deep, resonant heartbeat. Above, a ceiling of serrated bone fangs dripped with acidic saliva that sizzled where it struck the fleshy floor. Leo lay sprawled on a spongy surface, his clothes smoldering from contact with the digestive enzymes already beginning to eat through the fabric. Pain lanced through his ribs where the monster's teeth had grazed him, and a warm trickle of blood seeped from a gash on his forehead. "No, no, no," he whispered, the words swallowed by the cavern's oppressive hum. His mind raced, fragments of the battle flashing before him, Elena's desperate runes carving into the world devourer's hide, the monster's roar shaking the fortress to its foundations, the collective belief of thousands, soldiers, students, survivors, pouring into him through that strange, newfound resonance he dubbed catalytic resonance. It had felt like drowning in a sea of hope and fear, their faith a tangible force that had supercharged his creations, turning chalk and string into the rune of annihilation. But it hadn't been enough. The resonance had peaked at 100%, and in that moment of convergence, the beast had targeted him, its maw yawning wide. Now, trapped in its gullet, that belief still thrummed in his veins, a phantom energy that made his skin prickle. He could feel it, a chorus of voices in his head, "Save us, war god. Please, Leo, don't die. We believe in you." It was terrifying, intoxicating, and utterly useless if he couldn't channel it. "Think, Leo, think," he hissed, pushing himself to his knees. The floor shuddered as the monster moved, likely still engaged in the battle outside. Through the fleshy walls, he could hear muffled explosions, distant shouts, and the occasional tremor of magical attacks. Elena was out there, fighting. The academy was falling. He had to do something. His eyes darted around the chamber. No weapons. No tools. Just the organic nightmare of the world devourer's insides. But he was a synthesis master, or at least, the world thought he was. His skill, glitched and evolving, had always required two items to combine. What did he have here? Nothing but himself and this hellish environment. A memory surfaced, his first synthesis, back in his dorm room. A stick and a pebble, combined into a sharp rock that the system had misinterpreted as the God-sliver shard of eternity. It had cured Elena's curse, sparked this whole charade. Now, cornered in the belly of a beast that threatened to end humanity, he needed something far more potent. The chapter outline flashed in his mind, his own blood and a mundane rock. "Blood," he muttered, looking at his bleeding forehead. He wiped a hand across it, his fingers coming away slick and crimson. "And a rock." But there were no rocks here, just organic matter. Unless. His gaze fell on a protrusion nearby, a hardened nodule of calcified tissue, like a bone growth embedded in the wall. It was rough, gray, and about the size of his fist. Mundane in composition, perhaps, but part of the monster itself. Would it work? The system had always been indiscriminate, logging even his most pathetic combinations as divine artifacts. But this felt different. This was desperation distilled into action. Crawling over, he pried at the nodule. It resisted, fused to the flesh, but with a grunt and a sickening tear, he wrenched it free. It was heavy, cold, and pitted with tiny pores. A rock, in every sense that mattered. Now, for the blood. He held his wounded hand over the nodule, letting droplets fall onto its surface. They beaded, then seeped into the pores, darkening the gray to a rusty brown. "Okay," he breathed, his heart hammering against his ribs. Synthesis. He focused, calling upon his skill interface. It flickered in his vision, glitched lines of text scrolling past, Synthesis Master, Level 7, Catalytic Resonance, 100%, Belief Absorption Active, Warning, Anomalous Energy Detected. He ignored the warnings, mentally selecting the two items, his blood, a reagent, the system categorized it, and the calcified nodule, a mineral fragment. The process began. And it was agonizing. Unlike his previous syntheses, a brief flash of light, a tingling in his fingers, this one felt like his very soul was being torn apart. A searing heat erupted from his core, spreading through his limbs like molten lead. His blood, still dripping onto the nodule, began to glow with an inner light, pulsing in time with the monster's heartbeat. The nodule absorbed it, drinking it in, and as it did, it started to change. Cracks appeared on its surface, leaking a brilliant, crimson radiance. The air around it warped, shimmering with heat haze. Leo screamed, the sound lost in the cavern's hum. Pain lanced through every nerve, 1,000 needles driven deep. Visions flashed before his eyes, not memories, but fragments of belief from those outside, a child praying to him, a soldier clutching a makeshift idol with his face, Elena whispering his name like a mantra. Their faith became a physical force, pouring into the synthesis, fueling it beyond anything he'd ever attempted. The catalytic resonance wasn't just amplifying his creations now, it was becoming part of the process, weaving their hopes into the very fabric of the item. I can't, hold on, he gasped, his vision blurring. The nodule was transforming, shedding its rocky exterior to reveal a core of swirling, blood-red energy. It hovered in the air between his hands, no longer a rock but a pulsating, crystalline orb shot through with veins of gold and shadow. It hummed with power, a low frequency that vibrated in his bones. Then, the system flashed, its notification blazing across his vision with unprecedented intensity. Blood Sovereign Core of Creation, forged. Item class, Divine, Temporary. Effects, grants wielder temporary godlike authority over reality within a localized sphere. Duration, 5 minutes. Warning, excessive use may result in catastrophic feedback. Catalytic resonance expenditure, 100%, belief reserves depleted. Leo stared, panting, sweat and blood mingling on his face. The core floated before him, about the size of a grapefruit, its surface shifting like liquid gemstone. It felt alive, connected to him, an extension of his own will, fed by the belief of thousands. For the first time, his synthesis hadn't just been misinterpreted, it had created something genuinely, terrifyingly powerful. The glitch had evolved, or perhaps it had always been this, waiting for enough belief to catalyze it into truth. He reached out, his trembling fingers brushing the core. The moment he touched it, power surged through him. It was like being struck by lightning and baptized in starlight all at once. Energy, raw, primordial, and immense, flooded his veins, erasing the pain, filling him with a strength that made the world seem fragile. He rose to his feet, no longer the anxious nerd pretending to be a god, but something more. His senses expanded, he could feel the individual cells of the world devourer's flesh, the ebb and flow of its corrupted life force. He could hear the thoughts of those outside, not as words, but as emotional signatures, Elena's determination, the soldier's fear, the collective desperation of humanity. The cavern around him seemed to brighten, details sharpening into hyperclarity. I see, he whispered, his voice echoing with an unfamiliar resonance. He understood now. The core wasn't just a tool, it was a key, unlocking a fragment of divine authority fueled by belief. For 5 minutes, he could bend reality, within limits. He could manipulate matter, energy, even the system's own functions. But it was temporary, and the warning about catastrophic feedback hung in his mind like a guillotine blade. Before he could test it, the monster lunged. The cavern convulsed. The fleshy walls contracted, squeezing inward as the world devourer, sensing the anomalous energy within it, tried to crush him. Acidic jets sprayed from pores in the ceiling, sizzling toward him. A deep, guttural roar vibrated through the chamber, so loud it felt like his bones would shatter. Leo didn't flinch. With the core in hand, he simply willed it. He raised his free hand, palm outward. The acid jets halted in mid-air, droplets hanging like amber jewels. The contracting walls froze, held in stasis. Reality bent to his command, a localized sphere of influence radiating from the core. He could feel the strain, the 5-minute timer ticking down in his mind, the energy draining with each use. But for now, he was in control. Enough, he said, and his voice carried the weight of command. He focused on the core, channeling his intent. He needed to get out, to rejoin the battle, to end this. The core responded, its crimson light intensifying. With a thought, he directed its power at the wall before him, the path deeper into the monster's gullet. Space itself rippled, tearing open a rift that glowed with chaotic energy. Beyond it, he could see the outside world, the battlefield, the fortress walls scarred and smoking, Elena standing defiant before the monster's bulk. He stepped through the rift, emerging into the chaos of the battle. The scene was apocalyptic. The Azure Dawn Academy's outer walls were breached in multiple places, rubble strewn across the courtyard. Monsters, lesser spawns of the world devourer, clashed with soldiers and awakened students. Magic flared in bursts of fire and ice, but the tide was turning against them. At the center loomed the world devourer itself, a colossal beast of scales and tentacles, its hide now marred by the glowing runes Elena had inscribed. It was turning, its attention shifting from the fortress to Leo as he appeared from within it. Elena spotted him first. Her eyes widened, taking in his bloodied form, the pulsating core in his hand, and the aura of power that surrounded him like a corona of light. "Leo," she shouted, her voice raw with relief and awe. He landed lightly on the cracked earth, the core's energy cushioning his fall. The 5-minute timer was down to 4 minutes and 30 seconds. He had to act fast. The world devourer roared, a sound that cracked the ground. It lunged at him, its maw, the same one that had swallowed him, opening wide to finish the job. But Leo was ready. He raised the blood sovereign core high, and for the first time, he embraced the role they'd forced upon him. Not as a fraud, but as a catalyst. The belief of everyone here, their hope, their fear, had made this moment possible. And he would use it. "Let's end this," he said, and the core blazed like a newborn sun. Power surged, reality warping around him as the monster lunged, its shadow falling over him like the end of the world. The blood sovereign core of creation pulsed in Leo's palm like a second heart, its crimson light bleeding through his fingers and painting the air with shimmering auroras. Power, raw, unfiltered, and terrifying, coursed through his veins, not as a foreign invasion but as a homecoming. For 5 minutes, the system whispered, he was no longer Leo, the anxious college dropout with a glitched skill. He was something else. Something divine. Around him, the battlefield lay in ruins. The Azure Dawn Academy's outer walls were shattered, their once proud spires now jagged teeth against a smoke-choked sky. Monsters, lesser spawn of the world devourer, scuttled through the debris, but their movement seemed sluggish, muted, as if viewed through thick glass. In the distance, the world devourer itself loomed, a mountain of scales and malice, its maw still gaping from its failed lunge. Its eyes, pools of molten hatred, fixed on Leo. A low, grinding roar vibrated through the earth, shaking loose stones and rattling Leo's teeth. But Leo didn't flinch. The fear that had been his constant companion since the apocalypse began was gone, burned away by the core's fire. In its place was a cold, crystalline clarity. He could feel the battlefield, every crack in the ground, every shuddering breath of the wounded hunters, every flicker of dying magic. The system's notification scrolled through his mind, not as text but as instinct, reality-bending authority, active. Temporal manipulation, available. Spatial reconstruction, engaged. Leo. Elena's voice cut through the din, ragged with exhaustion. She stood 20 yards away, her armor cracked and stained with ichor, the rune of annihilation, the chalk string he'd given her, dangling limply from her hand. It had drawn glowing sigils in the air, scoring deep wounds across the world devourer's hide, but the monster still lived. Her eyes widened as she took in the core's light, the way the air bent around Leo like a heat haze. "What did you do?" "I synthesized a miracle," Leo said, and his voice was different, resonant, layered with echoes. It wasn't loud, but it carried across the battlefield, silencing the groans of the injured and the hisses of monsters. He didn't mean to sound so detached, it was the power speaking through him, smoothing his anxiety into something serene and deadly. The world devourer moved. It wasn't a lunge this time but a deliberate, earth-shattering stride, its clawed feet crushing rubble into powder. Its maw opened, and a beam of concentrated void energy erupted, a black-purple torrent that devoured light and sound, aimed straight at Leo. Before the apocalypse, Leo would have frozen. During his early days at the academy, he might have fumbled for a junk synthesis. Now, he simply raised his free hand. Time slowed. Not metaphorically, literally. Leo watched the void beam crawl toward him, its edges fraying like corrupted video. He could see the individual particles of disintegrating reality within it, could trace its path as if it were a snail's trail. With a thought, he twisted space. The beam veered, bending around him in an impossible arc, and struck a cluster of lesser monsters instead. They vanished without a sound, erased from existence. Gasps rippled through the survivors. Hunters who had been ready to flee paused, staring. Kale, the rival who had exposed Leo's fraud, stood atop a broken wall, his face pale with disbelief. "That's not a glitch," he muttered, but his words were lost in the sudden silence. Leo took a step forward. The ground didn't just yield, it reshaped itself, stone flowing like water to form a smooth path toward the world devourer. He walked calmly, the core's light intensifying with each stride. In his mind, a timer ticked down, 4 minutes, 30 seconds. The power was intoxicating, a heady rush that made his old life feel like a dream. But beneath it, a part of him, the real Leo, screamed that this was borrowed time, that when it ended, he'd be left empty. The World Devourer recoiled, its first show of uncertainty. It swiped a claw, each talon longer than Leo was tall, but Leo didn't dodge. He gestured, and the air solidified into a shimmering barrier. The claw struck it with a sound like a gong, and cracked spiderweb through the monster's own scales. The system whispered, "Divine retribution, damage reflected." "You are not a god," the World Devourer spoke, its voice a grinding avalanche of hate. The system translated its alien tongue, projecting the words into Leo's mind. "You are a flaw. A glitch. I will consume your anomaly and feast on your world's despair." Leo almost laughed. The irony was too rich, the monster calling him a glitch. "I'm whatever they believe I am," he said, and this time, his voice held a hint of his old self, wry and weary. He glanced at Elena, at the hunters, at the distant faces peering from the academy's broken windows. Their belief was a tangible force now, a golden thread connecting him to thousands of souls. He could feel it feeding the core, stretching his 5 minutes by fractions of a second. His skill, synthesis master, hummed in the background, no longer just combining items but weaving faith into reality. The World Devourer attacked in earnest. It unleashed everything, void beams, psychic screams that liquefied stone, physical strikes that shattered the landscape. Leo met each assault not with brute force, but with precision. He rewound time locally to undo a blast that would have killed a group of hunters. He folded space to teleport a falling tower away from wounded survivors. He synthesized on the fly, not with items, but with concepts. Drawing on the collective belief, he combined hope and defiance into a shimmering spear of light, which the system logged as lance of collective will. He threw it, and it pierced the World Devourer's chest, not with a physical wound but with a burst of pure affirmation that made the monster stagger. But it wasn't enough. The World Devourer was ancient, a creature born from the system's own cataclysm. Its health bar, visible only to Leo now through his divine senses, was a monstrous red line that barely dipped. 3 minutes left. Leo's body began to ache, the core's power straining his mortal frame. Blood trickled from his nose, hot and metallic. "Leo, you're bleeding." Elena shouted, starting toward him, but a wave of lesser monsters surged, forcing her back into combat. Leo ignored the pain. He needed an ending. Not just a victory, but a symbol. Something that would cement his charade forever, because deep down, he knew that after this, there would be no going back to obscurity. The world needed a war god, and like it or not, he had to be it. He raised the core high. "I am the synthesis master," he declared, and the words boomed across the battlefield, amplified by the system. "And I forge endings from beginnings." Focusing all the remaining belief, the desperate prayers of the hunters, the hope of the civilians, even the grudging awe of skeptics like Kale, he channeled it into the core. The crimson light blazed white-hot, and Leo synthesized one last time. He combined the blood-sovereign core of creation, with the very concept of the World Devourer's existence. It wasn't about items anymore, it was about narratives. His glitched skill, now evolved, accepted the input. The system flashed, its notifications frantic, ultimate synthesis, initiated. Paradox engine, engaging. Reality overwrite, in progress. The World Devourer screamed, a sound of pure ontological terror. Its form began to unravel, not into gore but into data, streams of light and code that spiraled toward the core. Leo felt the strain nearly break him, his bones creaked, his vision blurred. 1 minute left. He held on, pouring every ounce of his will into the synthesis. "Be undone," Leo whispered. And the World Devourer was. It didn't die, it was synthesized. Its essence merged with the core, transformed into something new. The white light condensed, then exploded outward in a silent wave. Where the monster had stood, there was now a massive, crystalline tree, its branches glowing with soft amber light. Leaves shaped like runes drifted down, each one healing a wound or purifying tainted ground where they landed. The system announced, cataclysmic entity synthesized into, World Tree of Renewal. The battlefield fell utterly silent. Then, a cheer erupted, tentative at first, then roaring, deafening. Hunters dropped their weapons, embracing. Elena sank to her knees, tears cutting through the grime on her face. Kale stared at the tree, his defiance crumbling into awe. Leo stood at the epicenter, the core now dark and inert in his hand. The power was gone. The timer had hit 0. The divine clarity vanished, leaving behind the familiar ache of exhaustion and the buzzing anxiety of his own thoughts. He felt hollow, scraped raw. His legs trembled. He tried to take a step toward Elena, to say something, anything, but the world tilted. The adrenaline crash hit him like a physical blow. The last thing he saw was Elena's face, streaking toward him, her mouth forming his name. Then darkness. He collapsed, the core rolling from his limp fingers. As he lost consciousness, the system broadcast globally, its voice echoing in every mind, on every surviving screen. War God Ascension confirmed. Designation, Leo, the Synthesis Sovereign. All hail the new divinity. And somewhere, in the depths of his fading awareness, Leo thought, well, shit. Now I really can't back out. The first thing Leo felt was the softness of silk sheets against his skin, a stark contrast to the jagged edges of reality he'd been wrestling with just hours before. He opened his eyes slowly, blinking against the gentle morning light filtering through tall, arched windows. He lay in a spacious chamber with marble floors and walls adorned with tapestries depicting heroic battles, some of which, he realized with a jolt, featured his own blurred likeness. His body ached with a deep, pervasive exhaustion, as if every cell had been stretched thin and then hastily reassembled. Memories flooded back, the cataclysmic roar of the world devourer, the surge of godlike power from the blood-sovereign core of creation, the desperate synthesis that had transformed the monster's essence into a healing world tree. And then, darkness. He pushed himself up on his elbows, wincing at the stiffness in his limbs. The room was silent save for the distant hum of activity beyond the door. On a bedside table, a crystal pitcher of water glimmered, next to a platter of fruits and fresh bread. Leo's stomach growled, but he hesitated, his mind racing. The system broadcasted my ascension. Everyone thinks I'm a war god. What now? As if on cue, the door swung open quietly. Elena stood there, her silver armor polished to a mirror shine, but her face was pale with worry. When she saw him awake, her eyes widened, and she rushed to his side. Leo. You're alive, thank the system. Her voice trembled slightly, a rare crack in her usual stoic demeanor. Leo managed a weak smile. Barely. How long was I out? 3 days, Elena said, pulling a chair close to the bed. The healers said your body was drained of all energy. They've been pumping you with potions, but it was your own synthesis that saved you. That world tree you created, its roots spread beneath the academy, radiating healing energy. It's why you're recovering so fast. He glanced out the window, where he could see the distant silhouette of a massive, glowing tree, its branches shimmering with ethereal light. It stood where the world devourer had fallen, a symbol of hope amid the rubble. And the others? The survivors? Elena's expression softened. Thanks to you, casualties were minimal. The monster's defeat has sparked, well, a global celebration. People are calling it the miracle of Azure Dawn. She paused, her gaze intense. Leo, the system's broadcast went everywhere. Every survivor camp, every fortress, they all heard it. War God Ascension confirmed. There's no going back from this. Leo's chest tightened. He'd been so focused on survival, on the immediate threat, that he hadn't fully processed the consequences. He was no longer the anxious nerd with a glitched skill, he was a deity in the eyes of humanity. The weight of it pressed down on him, making the silk sheets feel like chains. What do they want from me? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena sighed, running a hand through her hair. The Academy Council has been waiting for you to wake. They want to offer you a formal position, a throne, as their war god and protector. There's talk of rebuilding the world, with you at the center. Before Leo could respond, a knock echoed through the chamber. The door opened again, and Dean Eris, the head of Azure Dawn Academy, entered, followed by 2 high-ranking officials Leo recognized from earlier chapters. The dean was an elderly man with sharp eyes and a beard that seemed to crackle with latent energy. He bowed deeply, a gesture that felt surreal to Leo. Lord Leo, the dean said, his voice reverent. We are honored by your recovery. The world owes you its existence. Leo flinched at the title. Please, just Leo is fine. The dean straightened, a faint smile on his lips. As you wish, but the people have spoken. Your ascension has been verified by the system itself. We have prepared a ceremony in the Grand Hall, a coronation, of sorts. You will be given a throne of office, and authority over all awakened forces. With your power, we can forge a new era of peace. Leo's mind whirled. Asterisk a throne. Authority, asterisk he thought back to his first synthesis, the stick and pebble that became the Godsliver shard of eternity. It had all been a misunderstanding, a glitch that snowballed into this madness. But now, his skill had evolved. During the battle, he'd felt it, the belief of others fueling his creations, making them genuinely powerful. The blood sovereign core of creation hadn't just been a system error, it had tapped into something real. I need time to think, Leo said, his voice firmer than he expected. The Dean nodded. Of course. We will await your decision. But know this, Leo, humanity needs a symbol. In this broken world, hope is our greatest weapon. And you have become that hope. With another bow, the Dean and his entourage withdrew, leaving Leo alone with Elena. Silence stretched between them. Leo swung his legs over the side of the bed, testing his strength. He stood shakily, and Elena moved to support him, but he waved her off. I'm okay. Just, need to walk. He shuffled to the window, leaning against the sill. The academy grounds below were a hive of activity. Survivors worked together to clear debris, children played near the world tree's roots, and awakened warriors trained with renewed vigor. It was a scene of resilience, one he'd helped create. But at what cost? Elena, he said softly, not turning around. Do you believe I'm a war god? She joined him at the window, her shoulder brushing his. I believe you saved us. Multiple times. With a stick and a pebble, a paperclip, a broken phone, and your own blood. Maybe the system's labels are just words. But your actions? They're divine enough for me. Leo smiled faintly. Even though it all started as a mistake. Mistakes can become miracles, Elena replied. Look at that tree. It's healing the land, purifying the air. That's no glitch, Leo. That's power. He fell silent, his thoughts drifting. He remembered the hidden message he discovered weeks ago, the synthesis master is not a creator, he is a catalyst for belief. It made sense now. His skill wasn't just about combining items, it was about channeling the faith of others, turning their hope into tangible reality. The more people believed in him, the stronger his syntheses became. It was a terrifying responsibility. Over the next few hours, Leo wandered the academy grounds, Elena at his side. Everywhere he went, people bowed or stared in awe. Whispers followed him, the war god walks among us. He saw Kale, his old rival, now leading a repair crew. Their eyes met, and Kale gave a grudging nod, a silent acknowledgement of Leo's role in their survival. There was no more talk of fraud, the trial felt like a distant memory. As dusk approached, Leo found himself in his old workshop. It had been expanded, filled with rare materials and artifacts donated by grateful survivors. On a workbench, a simple silver locket lay, left there by Elena as a memento. He picked it up, feeling its cool metal against his palm. This was where it had all begun, where he'd fumbled with junk, terrified of being exposed. Now, he understood. He could reveal the truth, that he was just a man with a weird skill, that his divinity was a collective delusion. But what would that achieve? Chaos, disillusionment, maybe even collapse. The world had latched onto his myth, and that myth was holding it together. His skill had evolved because of that belief, without it, would his syntheses revert to being mundane? Would the world tree wither? He thought of the future. A throne meant leadership, but also a platform. He could use his synthesis not just for weapons, but for rebuilding, combining seeds and soil to create fertile land, scrap metal and blueprints to forge shelters, medicine and hope to heal the sick. He could be the catalyst for a genuine new era, not as a fraud, but as a symbol made real by the faith he inspired. The choice crystallized in his mind. He wasn't the war god they imagined, but he could become it. He could embrace the role, wield the power of belief, and steer humanity toward peace. It was a lie that had become truth, a weakness that had become strength. Leo turned to Elena, who had been watching him quietly from the doorway. I've decided, he said, his voice steady. I'll accept their offer. Elena's eyes glimmered with relief and something else, pride, perhaps. Are you sure? Yes, Leo said. But not for the throne or the title. For them. He gestured toward the window, where the sounds of rebuilding echoed. I can help. Really help. My skill, it's changed. It's not just a glitch anymore. It's a tool, and I want to use it. He walked back to the workbench, picking up the silver locket again. It was plain, unadorned, a simple piece of jewelry. But as he held it, an idea formed. He reached for a small vial of healing potion from a shelf and a fragment of crystal that had fallen from the world tree. He placed them on the bench, his hands trembling slightly. "What are you doing?" Elena asked, stepping closer. "One last synthesis," Leo said. "To mark the choice." He focused, calling upon his synthesis master skill. The interface flickered in his vision, but now it glowed with a steady, golden light. New text scrolled, * belief absorption, active. Faith reservoir, 98%. * He took a deep breath, combining the locket, the potion, and the crystal. The process was smoother than ever before, energy flowing effortlessly from his fingertips. The items merged in a soft flash of light, leaving behind a locket that now pulsed with a gentle, warm radiance. The system notification appeared instantly, glowing in the air before him. Eternal bond of legends, forged. Effect, bond strengthened by hope become unbreakable. Grants minor healing and protection to the wearer. Quality, mythic. Creator, war god Leo, *. Leo picked up the locket, its chain cool and solid. He turned to Elena, offering it to her. "For you," he said. "A promise. That I'll be the god they need, and the friend you've always had." Elena took it, her fingers brushing his. She fastened it around her neck, the locket resting against her armor. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "But Leo, what does this mean for the future?" He looked out at the darkening sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. "It means we rebuild. Together. And maybe, there are more adventures ahead." As he spoke, the system interface flickered again, new, cryptic message scrolling at the edge of his vision, * anomaly detected, reality glitch stabilizing. New synthesis paths unlocked. Prepare for convergence, *. Leo's breath caught. The choice was made, but the journey was far from over. He was the war god now, for better or worse, and the world, and whatever lay beyond, was waiting.